The meeting will come to order. This is a regular business meeting of the Riverside District 96 Board of Education. It's Wednesday, February 21st. Marjorie, please call the roll.
Mr. Barsati?
Present.
Mr. Hunt?
Here.
Ms. Kleiber?
Here.
Mr. Merhol?
Here.
Mr. Miller?
Here.
Ms. Murphy?
Here.
Mr. Regan?
Present.
Thanks, Margie. At this point, is there any public comment? If there's no public comment, does any board member have any proposed changes to or additions to the agenda? If not, we move right on to the superintendent's report.
Wonderful. And I have the pleasure of introducing, I know Ms. May and Mr. McAndrew, and I don't know the students, but we're about to meet them. So I'm going to turn it over to you to share a little bit about Roots and Shoots at Hauser.
I just wanted to quickly introduce Mr. Patrick McAndrew, who is our teacher who is leading the Roots and Shoots, one of our co-curricular clubs that is meeting after school. So I'm going to let him introduce the students, and then they're going to give you really the meat and potatoes of what Roots and Shoots is all about.
Good evening. I'm Patrick McAndrew. I'm just going to quickly introduce myself. I'm new to Hauser last year. I've been teaching overseas for the past 7 years in Kathmandu, Nepal. At the school in Nepal that I was at, we had a wonderful Roots and Shoots program, so I decided that I would bring it here to Hauser and introduce our students in our community. And I'm just going to let my students take it away because they've put together a great presentation and they can tell you all about our program. So these are, I have about 13 kids that are in my group, so there's 5 that are here to present tonight. Really good. Okay, so if you guys can just, when you come up, just say your name and do your thing, okay? What grade
No pressure at all. Hi, my name is Montserrat Tirado, and I'm in 8th grade. So the quote we decided to use that we felt really represented the group and what Jane Goodall wanted to help us acknowledge about the group was, "You cannot get through a single day without having an impact on the world around you. What you do makes a difference, and you have to decide what kind of difference you want to make."
Hi, my name is Sam Gersh, and I'm in 8th grade, and I'm going to be talking about what it exactly is Roots and Shoots. So Roots and Shoots was founded in 1991 by Jane Goodall. Our mission is to foster and respect all living things, to expand culture and beliefs, and to inspire others to take a stand and to make our world a better place for our plants, animals, and even ourselves.
Hi, I'm Alicia Valencia, and I'm in 8th grade. What I'm talking about is what we do and what we can do, not only for our community, but for the world. Hundreds of thousands Roots and Shoots members all over the world are working hard to make our world a better place. We are working around our community and being the leaders we need to be. One tiny thing can make a big difference, and if we can get more and more people to focus on helping the community, we can make our world so much more efficient.
Hi, I'm Krista and I'm in 8th grade. So this is a look at our current garden space. This space was overlooked by the Loopfer Landscaping Company. Mr. Loopfer was giving us many opinions and ideas for the garden space. He said that there would be, if we put native flowers into the garden space, it would attract butterflies and bees, which would then pollinate the flowers to make more seeds. This would pollinate pollinate the flowers to make more seeds. This would then plant more flowers, which would make healthy oxygen for us, and the cycle goes on. We are planning fundraisers to help assist with the cost, and we'll break ground in the next few months.
Hi, my name's Claire Krupski. I'm in 6th grade, and this is me.
I'm sorry about the confusion, but these are our future plans and events. So we have the pleasure to announce that we have been invited to be part of the One in Earth Festival at the Thatcher Pavilion in River Forest on Saturday, March 10th, from 1 o'clock to 3 p.m. to 3 o'clock. They will represent a special screening of the 2017 documentary about Jane Goodall's life entitled Jane. We'll present as a panel explaining our purpose and what we have planned for the future of our group. We hope to better benefit our viewers on the knowledge of our world and how we can make an impact just by doing one thing at a time. So that's our future plans and events.
Okay, so one of our first assessments was applying for Roots and Shoots mini grants. We all wrote letters to the Jane Goodall Foundation and explained our plans to make our school a little bit more beautiful by adding a garden at the front entrance. Our words were so inspiring that we were selected for a special grant and received $200 to begin our first school project. We were so excited by this honor. We have lots of plans for the world, not limiting ourselves to just our community. For starters, we are all currently planning a District 96 movie night for the month of April. We hope to use this event to raise money to help pay for the landscaping of our garden in the spring. Next, we hope to inspire our school community to be more aware of the needs of our planet and really take energy conservation and recycling more seriously. Finally, we are planning to work with a deaf school in Nepal and help them to get much more needed resources for their students. We started locally and are moving internationally and hopefully internationally. And we will continue to dream big.
And that's our presentation.
Oh, that's very nice. Can we ask questions, or do you have a few minutes to ask questions? So the garden, is that your garden? I like the idea of putting a native plant garden out in front of Hauser. I think that'll look great. And congratulations on winning the award for doing that. That's wonderful. So the garden, is that going to be right in front of the sitting area? Is that?
Go back to the slide with the garden space. So the garden space is right in front of the schools, by the main entrance.
Just to the right, basically, of the.
Yeah.
Okay. So I was wondering, is that tree that you see there? And this is a question for you guys.
Yes.
Maybe you have an opinion about this. There's a hackberry tree. I'm not sure if it's that one. It's sort of half dead. And maybe if you're thinking about putting a garden there, you might want to make a recommendation about that tree, if something should be done to it. Because
He's a part of
what I'm saying is that,
Yes, I understand. We will ask the Loop for a landscaping company if the tree will need to be replaced.
Yeah.
If it does, then we'll just probably have to take it down,
Right.
like you said, and we'll probably just plant around it
Right, makes sense. Yeah.
if it's not ready to be taken down.
Yeah, that sounds great.
Are there any more?
Do you want to tell them what our biggest concern with the garden has been?
Our biggest concern with the garden is the students, honestly, because they're, of course, middle schoolers, so they have a tendency to be bad at times. So we were worried that they would start stomping around our garden space at times because there is a beautiful bushes over here, and they still run through there for playing tag and everything after school. So we're worried that our flowers will be stepped over. One way we would want to improve that was we were going to make a pathway through the garden, which would help know that this is a space that you walk through, not the plant itself. Or we would build a small little brick wall around it. It's not going to be a big wall much. It'll be like a little sitting space essentially, and that would be a way to also protect the flowers and plants.
That sounds great. I mean, it sounds like you've thought of all the aspects. It's really, really good.
Are there any other questions, concerns? Yes.
How does Roots and Shoots compare to something like Girl Scouts or Boy Scouts?
So we don't do many activities like the Girl Scouts do, where we go sell Girl Scout cookies, essentially. We are more environmentalists. We take care of the planet, while Girl Scouts and Boy Scouts are more looking to advance their nature skills, like being in nature itself. So we are looking to help nature rather than to be in nature.
So I want to know, when you guys are at home, do you do this around your house? Are you guys planting and weeding and doing all that? Because I know 2 kids you could teach.
So I personally don't plant because I really don't have a reason why. I don't plant, but I'm not sure if any of them do. Do you have like a garden in your home or like outside?
Yeah.
You do?
Well, maybe after this experience, you'll bring it
Yeah.
back. That's great.
Well, and just last week, just this week, we watched a short film about the planet, and one of the philosophies was called the dot philosophy. Can you tell everyone what dot means?
The dot philosophy was to do one thing.
So it's kind of choosing one thing and kind of focusing on doing that. So for instance, like the one thing that I have for me is that I'm trying to go paper free in my classroom and start to eliminate the amount of paper I use. But it can be anything from turning off your tap when you brush your teeth to not using a straw when you go to a restaurant. So just choosing one thing and focusing on it. I told the students a story about when I met Jane Goodall in Nepal, and she was speaking at a school, and this little girl stood up, and she was a 6th or 7th grader, and she raised her hand, and she started to tell Dr. Goodall that it was really frustrating to live in a country where the majority of the people didn't care about the environment. And she said, I'm this one person, and I'm constantly telling my friends, don't throw your trash, or don't do this, and let's take care of our planet. And she started to cry as she was speaking. She was so passionate about this. And Jane Goodall went over to her, came off the stage, and said, if you can do what you can do as one person, then you're making the difference. Because if each of us took responsibility for ourselves and our own actions, then we're making a change slowly but surely. So we don't have to worry about telling you to do it and you to do it. But if I can do it, then it'll make... And the girl totally recovered herself, and she got a big grin on her face, and she sat down, and you could see that she was so satisfied. So one of the things that I want to stress to these guys is that we might not be able to change every single other person, but if each of us can change ourselves, then we as individuals can make a difference. And these are amazing young people. I mean, I'm inspired by meeting people like this that, just chose to do this after school activity, knowing that it'd be involving service and hard work, and, like they get so, Krista and I have had these talks about they really want to put this beautiful garden in, and they're so worried that people aren't going to see how important and how passionate it was for them. And that's their biggest worry. So it was so wonderful when Mr. Lupfer said to us, you know what we're going to do? We're going to put a path right through that. And it will be so clear, the kids, your fellow students will know this is where you walk. This is what you enjoy. This is where you walk. So, these are amazing young people. I'm so proud of them.
Thank you very much.
Are there any more questions or concerns?
No, I think you're wonderful. You're so articulate, and all of you. Thank you so much.
Thanks very much.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you.
Well, thank you for your time. It's been amazing. A great experience, and it helps us get to know our garden a little bit more better by answering these questions today. Thank you.
Thanks very much. Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you.
In case you have homework or anything tonight, you're allowed to go home.
They could put extra assignments in the garden. That would keep the kids away.
I know you had all heard about Roots and Shoots when they received that grant, and it's really great to hear from the students that are actually doing the work. So thanks again for coming.
Let us know when it's finished so we can go
Right.
see it. Yeah.
So always moving on to less exciting things after that. I also just wanted to share that after our snow day, we do have to make up that day, and we set up 5 emergency days on our calendar when we put our calendar out at the beginning of the year. So June 7th seems like the natural. It's the proposed first emergency day after what would have been June 6th, last day of school. So we will be publicly communicating that, but I wanted to share that with all of you. And then,
I have a quick question.
oh, sure.
Does that affect an 8th grade graduation date? No.
It doesn't affect the graduation date.
So I was already asking you about it.
That's the Thursday night, is that correct?
What's the actual date, April?
May
31st. Yeah. So 8th graders get a little lucky this year. That's how they see it. I also wanted to share with you just an update on the registration and residency process. This is the same process that we talked about at our last meeting, and just wanted to reiterate the plan to move forward with a kindergarten, 3rd, and 6th grade in-person residency process. All other families will do an electronic upload of kind of those primary residency documents. And we will be getting word out about that also, but I want to make sure that I shared that with all of you.
I have one minor, because I have an existing student, is that I have to bring the documents again for my kindergartner, and I just did that, but it could be mildly annoying, but we'll take care of it.
And I think there will be families that will probably find that K, 3, and 6 might appear in their lives.
Yeah.
So it's we're trying to do
Only
it so
because
that
we
there's-
just did it, that's why it's a little strange.
Yeah.
But,
And
Okay.
we'll continue to monitor it over time, and our goal is to have a tighter residency process. As I said, we did, I think we kind of cleared sort of a backlog and improved the process, and we'll look at if we find that we're finding that families at K, 3, and 6, we have a kindergarten, a 3rd grade, or 6th, that it's
only
ends up
because
being
we
very
have a
frequent.
student. Yeah, I totally could see if they're new to the district, you absolutely need to bring it. It's
Yeah.
just a little strange.
Every year, people have to provide their residency documents anyway. It's just those are the 3 in person.
I know, but I
No, I'm just
realize
making
that,
sure
but we
for
just, because I have to bring it on March 3rd, we just went through that process, is what I'm saying, because it's kind of a little bit ahead of the normal schedule, so. Not a big deal, just,
Well, if you'll do K, then you don't have to come back, then you're done. If you've
Yeah,
done your
usually
K,
what?
yeah. So, yeah, all right. Those are the superintendent report items.
All right, thanks, Martha. Next item is the consent agenda. So at this point, would the board secretary like to read the consent agenda?
Yes, tonight's consent agenda includes minutes of the previous meetings, the closed session of January 17th, the regular business meeting of January 17th, the closed session of February 7th, the committee of the whole of February 7th, the personnel report, the payables pre-lists of January 31st and February 21st of this year. And then we have a lengthy list of IASB press issue number 96, including policy 4110, transportation, 2260, uniform grievance procedure. We will accept the default position. Policy 4150, facility management and building programs. Policy 4170, safety. Policy 520, workplace harassment prohibited. Policy 590, abused and neglected child reporting. Policy 5100, staff development program. Policy 5200, terms and conditions of employment and dismissal. Policy 5220, substitute teachers. Policy 5240, suspension. Policy 5290, employment termination and suspensions. Policy 650, school wellness. Policy 660, curriculum content. Policy 6150, home and hospital instruction. Policy 6340, student testing and assessment program. Policy 710, equal educational opportunities. Policy 715, student and family privacy rights. Policy 720, harassment of students prohibited. Policy 770, attendance and truancy. Policy 7180, prevention and response to bullying, intimidation, and harassment. Policy 7190, student behavior. Policy 7250, student support services. Policy 7275, orders to forego life-sustaining treatment. Policy 7305, student athlete concussion and head injuries. Policy 7340, student records. That is all of the press issue number 96 policies that are being revised. Then we have the employee recognition event of 2017 and 2018 and the 2017-2018 employee wellness screening.
Thanks, Joel. At this point, are there any of these items on the consent agenda that anyone would like to have taken off for further discussion?
Item 6, please, the employee recognition event.
Item 6, are there any other items?
Let's take off here's the items. It's policy 650, school wellness.
Policy 650,
Right, and 715, student and family privacy rights.
715,
718, the prevention and response to bullying, intimidation, and harassment.
718,
And then policy 719, student behavior.
719,
And then lastly, 734, student records.
7340. So are there any other changes or any other things anyone would like taken off at this point? If not, is there a motion to approve the consent agenda with all items except for item 6 and policies 650, policy 715, policy 718, policy 719, and policy 7340?
Second.
Margie, please call the roll.
Mr. Marhol?
Yes.
Mr. Regan?
Aye.
Mr. Hunt?
Aye.
Ms. Kleiber?
Aye.
Ms. Murphy?
Aye.
Mr. Barsadi?
Aye.
Mr. Miller?
Aye.
Motion carried.
Thanks, Margie. So why don't we look at first at item number 6, the employee recognition event. Julie had a question about that.
It seems that there was a rather significant increase from last year's event to this year's event, about 30+%. I'm not sure what the justification was.
I noticed the same thing, Joel, and I think there's an addition error in the second event total. If somebody wants to take a look at that.
Well,
The
even-
golf club fees just don't add up correctly.
Yeah, I was wondering
They're about
that.
1,000
I didn't
high.
take the time to do it, yeah.
They're about 1,000 high, or $1,200 high
Something seems strange.
than what they should be, just
Right.
based on the rates and the attendees estimate.
Right, right. Thank you,
That's
Kurt.
correct, but then, and in addition to what we noticed, there's also the gift card amount, which increased by about a half.
Gift cards are for retire.
Is that just due to the number of
Is
the
that
number of
where-
retirees that we have?
Yeah, so it's
Unlike the
specifically related
service
to, we have
Yeah.
more retirees.
So it fluctuates.
Are-
And
there's
Margie's
that.
correct, like the longer that they
Yeah.
serve, they get a different amount, yeah.
So I
We
have some updated information. So my understanding is the budget's based on about 120 attendees. So again, it's a budgeted process at $44 a person, which is $2 more per person than last year. The expense for the gift cards is increased because of the number of staff being honored for their years of service and retirees. It's not that there's a greater amount per gift card, it's that there are more people receiving the gift cards. 33 staff members this year will receive gift cards, and last year 26 staff members received gift cards. Attendance every year is fluid, depends on how many of the staff members are retiring. We actually anticipate this to be a larger group, and oftentimes when there's more retirees, then there's also more people that come to honor them.
I realize that it's a budget, but when you take 120 estimated attendees at $44 a person, it still comes up to $5,280.
Yeah, so that-
52
that
what?
first-
So maybe there's a
Yeah.
52
That first
eight.
line item, instead of being
Yeah, that's-
6348, it's
Right.
1,000. It's actually 1,000.
There's a math error.
Okay.
Rich is. Can we get that updated
Sure.
total then?
Is it possible if we're talking about, we think that there are going to be more attendees there, that the attendee number estimate is not right?
It's hard to know an estimated number. I mean, I think I think Dawn has been doing this for a number of years. She probably has a pretty good sense of that, but that's not going to be a perfect science.
Yeah, it depends on what, like, let's say they came from a certain teaching department and the whole crew might come. You might have 8 people versus somebody that might work in a smaller department. Yeah, I don't know.
My understanding too, and maybe some of the previous board members can speak to this better than I can, is that there was an agreement that there would be a budgeted amount to be spent on any kind of food and, I don't really want to call it entertainment, but this particular event annually, that amount is capped. And so this falls within that. That means then we also have to spend less in other areas.
Yes, I vaguely remember that this occurred before I was on board, but I vaguely remember it was something like $18,000 or $20,000 total, and about half of that would be allocated to the dinner, and
Yeah.
maybe that's been a little bit less recently because there have been fewer retirees, fewer attendees. Something like that's my vague recollection,
Yeah,
but
that's what I
something like
remember.
9,000 was more or less, I think, the budget.
That sounds about right to me. For my part of it, I understand it's a budget, you know, and just understanding what the increases are applied to, I'm fine with it. I would just like the numbers clarified, that's
No,
all.
that's a really good catch. I thought something was weird, but I didn't, you spent more time, thank you.
Yeah, so the increase from last year isn't
Isn't
great.
quite as much, yeah.
You okay with that, Joel?
I think what everybody else is saying, check the math on that.
Sounds good.
The attendees number, but the
All right,
gift
so-
cards make sense.
Next item is policy 650.
Yeah, I'm going to
Do we need to vote on that?
I was going to
Individually?
wait and
Okay.
see if we get agreement
After
on
the policy.
I mean, I just had one minor thing with this one, is that
school wellness.
School wellness. Under like the section goals for nutrition education, talks about a number, it says emphasis on the following: food allergies, diabetes, obesity, and other health-related risks. I just think because we've called out specific things such as food allergies and diabetes and obesities, I do think we should call out eating disorders as well, specifically in that. I just think that's, seeing that we're focusing on nutrition, I think that's something that should just be called out specifically.
I would guess that that's part of the junior high curriculum, Meryl, but what about, would that be applicable for the elementary students, or is it not?
It's not in the elementary curriculum.
Right, that's the only
Some of
question
these
I would
that are
have.
specifically listed are actually specifically listed in the curriculum mandates.
Right.
Eating disorders is not specifically called out, but eating appropriately is folded in without a specific reference. If you wanted to add a specific reference, we would have to respond to that curricularly, which we can. Add something specific to that.
That's fine. I just, with that explanation, that makes a little bit more sense. I just wanted to make sure that we weren't.
Yeah, no.
And I know at the junior high, that's definitely the talk
It's
that
addressed through like
my
the
daughter
healthy
has.
eating and taking care of your body.
Yeah.
But the things that are specifically cited here are specifically cited in the health curriculum by our state compliance.
Right.
And we actually had this exact same conversation when Pam and the wellness committee reviewed. Yeah, and we, not specifically about eating disorders, about other things and why are we using other health related. So it's a catch, it's a good catch, yeah.
We talked about allergies, but yeah.
I would just ask that if we might think about possibly expanding it to the lower grades, because I do think that it might start not. Yeah, it might not start like in kindergarten, but I do think it might start at the fourth, fifth. Yeah.
What's gymnastics and dance?
Right. Exactly.
It's
Yeah.
outside curricular activities and keeping fit. Yeah.
Right. Okay.
I've experienced that.
Yeah.
So yes, I'll speak to the health and PE teachers, and we can examine where in their curricular scope and sequence it may be possible to weave that in, and then I'll circle back.
Right. But I'm okay with the policy.
So you're thinking, okay with the policy as is,
Right.
okay, 650.
Note on that.
Yeah.
As far as anything.
Next policy was 715, I believe. Student and family privacy rights.
Right. Under that section, there was it's under it's like the page 2 under selling or marketing of students' personal information is prohibited. I don't think it's all. I don't think it's. It says parents' first name, last name. I'm thinking we need to be a little bit more inclusive. I think it should basically include all family information, not just like the names, the parent family's names or personal information, like first name and last name, physical address. It should like include employers. I think it should include like if we have income, like basically any information we have.
No information about families whatsoever.
Right. That's what I would. For marketing, especially for marketing. I mean.
Martha, did you have any comments about that or that idea?
No, I would be fine with taking this back for review. That's what would.
It sounds reasonable to me. I mean, I don't see why that should be limited. You're right. I mean, it should just be all identification.
Right.
Especially for marketing.
Right. Yeah.
They have no business.
Right.
They don't need to know that.
So that would be we'd ask the policy chair and Martha to look at that again. Is
Sounds reasonable.
Is everyone okay with that?
Sure.
Sure.
Okay. Next item was 718, which is
7180.
7180.
It was 7180. 7180. prevention of and response to bullying, intimidation, and harassment.
In the first section on number 4, it talks about transmission bullying from basically computers outside of our district. I just want to first of all stress, I do not believe this is not any way condoning bullying. I'm just looking at this as possibly an overreach by the school district. It's like we're not required to monitor outside activities, but it doesn't prevent us from doing that. I mean, there's been a lot of things in the press about students getting caught.
Social media.
Right.
Yes.
Which section are you reading exactly?
Number 4.
Number 4, page 1?
Yeah.
The first number 4, right?
I'm just uncomfortable with the fact that the school can be going outside the school, I'm going to say the school bounds, because that just, to me, that strikes me as big brotherish. And
What's the legal opinion on that?
I don't know.
So the second part of that sentence says, if the bullying causes substantial disruption to the educational process or the operation of the school.
Right, but I guess.
Should we just read the whole paragraph just so
Yeah, why don't
people know
you
what we're
read
talking
it?
about here?
Sure.
Yeah.
So that it's number 4 here, and it says.
Bullying is prohibited.
All right.
So bullying is prohibited in each of the following situations. And number 4 says through the transmission of information from a computer that is accessed at a non-school related location, activity, function, or program, or from the use of technology or an electronic device that is not owned, leased, or used by a school district or school if the bullying causes substantial disruption to the educational process or an orderly operation of a school. This item 4 applies only in cases in which the school administrator or teacher receives a report that bullying through this means has occurred, and it does not require a district or school to staff or monitor any non-school related activity, function, or program.
I guess where I'm stuck, I'm just getting stuck on the verbiage is it does not require this district, and it just doesn't mean we can't, and I just don't think we should.
Does not require
But what
us
if
to
it
monitor.
interrupts?
Well, I think though that,
what's
you know,
happening
it's
at school?
the operative language is where it talks about the administrator or teacher receives a report of bullying through that. And so I think,
Well, then we
you know,
have
it's
a duty.
establishing,
Right.
it's establishing there's not, people aren't just doing it willy-nilly, or they're not looking across things because they want to. There's has to be a report
Right.
that backs it up that would cause them to start looking at these things first. That's my understanding of it. I mean, I hear what you're saying, that the way it's worded, it says, does not require a district or school or staff to monitor these people. Doesn't say that we shouldn't, or doesn't say that we can't. But again, I'll go back to that initial statement is more limiting in my mind, where it talks about you have to have a report of an incident first to go looking for these things. And Martha, if I'm overstepping
Reported
that.
and a substantial disruption.
Right.
And I will say this, and I know we have April here. This is a very real issue in our culture right now. Children using social media to bully other children, and it is extremely complex to get our hands around. It's true of, I think, all school administrators everywhere. I don't think that's unique here in District 96. I do think we have some duty to intervene when these situations are made known to us, and these things do happen on. They are not happening on our school-issued devices. They are happening on students, private cell phones with their private Snapchat accounts, probably Snapchat in particular, right? So I appreciate the sensitivity around it because I think it is it's very challenging. But I think we do have a duty and an obligation when this disruption is created, when families do report, when children have been incredibly unkind to each other through social media. So, I think that's what this is trying to get to.
Well, I think that it interrupts the education process. That means something's happening either in the classroom or the hallways. It's not allowing them and other people around them to learn. And that's when I think it might be necessary. If it comes here and starts festering, and that's when I don't know what else you could do other than.
No, I can see that point.
I really can't see our administrators just like, yeah, let's go, bother people and think they have other things to do, but I see what you're saying, yeah.
I support the language as it exists.
Yeah, I do as
It's
well.
the ability to jump in as it affects the educational process, really, just as
I
it's
see what
written.
you're saying. I mean, I don't want Big Brother in my stuff.
Right. But the fact that it says significant, I can probably live with that. I mean, significant disruption, I should say.
Yeah, substantial disruption,
Right,
yeah,
yes.
yeah.
I guess there's a judgment call to be made about what's substantial and what's not. You don't want the school district to be involved in adjudicating every dispute between students, obviously.
Right. Right.
But if it's...
Is that what you want to do?
All right, so are we okay with that language then?
I'm okay with that, yeah.
Okay.
It's good to mention though because it's such a.
I think it raises a very,
No,
very important issue, actually,
totally
which
get
is,
that, yeah.
you don't want the school to have limitless obligations to, be outside of the school itself proper. I think it's a good point. Next item was policy 719.
Right.
190.
7190?
Yeah.
And this one, I had two primary issues with this one. Is that it's on page 1 under when and where conduct rules apply. Item 1, it says on or within sight of school grounds before, during, or after school hours, or at any time. And I guess for me is it's sort of creating two classes of students. Because if we're sort of monitoring people who live across the street and they're playing with their friends or they're getting they violate one of these rules, they're within sight of the school. But if the same event happened, say at my house, and I'm not within sight of the school, these rules don't apply.
But it says it's a student, so.
Right, but I mean, a student who lives within.
But an active student at that school, I think is what it's applying. Maybe I'm reading it wrong, but I thought it would apply to
I guess
those
I'm just
students
saying.
that are walking home or something.
I think we
across
should
the
just.
street.
I guess what I'm just saying is we should take within sight of, because I think that's just sort of too encompassing.
That seems, you're right about that. I mean, that's certainly, it seems like a technicality, but I agree with you. I mean, if you're across the street, then you shouldn't be singled out.
I disagree because if they're walking to and from school
I think it's
or
maybe
they're
walking to and
loitering in a
to
neighborhood
catch the
near the
neighbor
school.
and their babysitter and the kids. I think it has to do with children walking home, an incident happens, and administrator sees them or whatever.
I think an example of this can be that the administration or the teachers know that a potential problem could be leaving the school, and the intention could be to step right off school property, and then the problem ensues. And that gives the administration the ability to step in at that point if something bad is happening that they see.
And at that point, I think it's the law enforcement needs to get involved at that point. And I don't necessarily.
I disagree. I'd rather have the administrators deal with them than the police.
But I think the thing is, but making the district the onus to sort of mitigate this off of school properties, I think that just increases our exposure, and I'm not comfortable with that.
I see where you're coming from, but I think this goes back to the bullying issue, which is that first sentence says the student's conduct is reasonably related to school or school activities. And I think we end up falling back to the judgment of the administration to say,
but I guess
this is related to.
Right.
Why would they tell the kids across the street if it doesn't have to relate to school activities?
Well, it says when and where conduct rules apply. That's the issue.
Whenever it is reasonably tied, you have to connect all of these portions. You can't. I don't think they exist without each other, honestly.
And I think it speaks to this in loco parentis issue, right? So we are in charge of children, when parents aren't.
Right.
And so the to and from school, on school or in sight of. I mean, I appreciate the sensitivity around it, but this isn't meant, I think, for us to monitor children playing across the street. This is really meant to monitor that, when we are concerned about behavior that might occur or has just occurred on the way. It strikes me as the to and from school issue, within sight of the school. Yeah, it feels like the school to me. We're not out looking for,
Right. No,
sometimes kids go and play like in the triangles or, that's.
Yeah. Right.
We don't go out and sort of explicitly kind of overly monitor, but if we know that there are problems, whether it's a child getting hurt. I know this one speaks more around behavior and misconduct, but I can think of a handful of situations where it's
So
we are addressing behavior that's happening in those areas.
I guess I'm just still uncomfortable with like that or within sight of. That's what bothers me. And I personally, I just couldn't support this because of those like 4 words.
Should we just go around the table and see what people
I think you could call the vote on it.
Yeah. Well,
You want to do a straw poll?
Well, the straw poll, there's no point having a vote if there's
Well,
no straw
but if he wants to
separate vote, we can do a
publicly
separate vote, yes.
vote
Yes.
separately.
Yeah, because there's also another section in here, and this is just more of just discussion. It's under prohibited student conduct, under item 3, line A. It's talking about medical cannabis.
What page are you on? What page are you on?
Still on 1.
Page 1. Prohibited student conduct, number 3, line A. I'm not saying that we should be allowing cannabis in schools, but I don't think we should be prohibiting or preventing the student who has a medical prescription for cannabis. I mean, you don't get those lightly. I mean, those students.
This is talking about gross disobedience. I think it's talking about using it inappropriately or selling or.
Yeah, if you look at the header in prohibited student conduct, it's for gross disobedience
or
in these
misconduct.
areas. I don't think a child who's been prescribed something and that sort of thing, I don't think that's gross disobedience.
Well, then
You
I
have to
guess-
look at the umbrella.
There's actually an interesting
What's the other
case
piece
right
of
now in I believe it's Schaumburg School District, and I don't know the outcome, where I believe it's school code language is in direct contradiction to this. I think they have come to some temporary agreement around that issue. I do think it's probably precedent setting for school districts, and this policy perhaps hasn't caught up with that change. I think that change is still working its way sort of through.
I mean, it's just the fact that we.
Misconduct, how would it be considered misconduct if it's rightfully there?
Because it says medically. I mean, we call it out including
But
medical.
it's under the term, these things are misconduct. You're only disciplining if it's gross disobedience. I don't think that's what you're talking about.
Well, I think some people could perceive that as gross.
I disagree.
Well, I would agree that I wouldn't find it gross disobedience, but I think some people could.
I don't think our administration would.
Well, but I mean, if, the state law allows it, so I mean, if it's something like that would, I don't see how that could be, how you could justify that as gross disobedience. I think it comes back to, in my mind, your the header talks about the gross misconduct. Somebody who has a prescription for medical cannabis but is like distributing it or giving it to other kids or something like that, maybe.
Or overusing it.
Right.
Yeah.
I do think, to David's point, I do think it's more subtle than that. I think the state law has prohibited it being on school campus, even if it was medically prescribed. And so this particular family, and it's more what I know from watching the local news, I don't, have not consulted with an attorney on this, and we certainly could, is that was actually the controversy that came up, is that the school code or state law said they can't have it, medical records, and indicated the child needed it, and they did come to some agreement around it.
So I'm assuming this will
That's
probably be
not our
coming.
problem here.
I don't think that is their problem.
I don't think
This is about
I don't think
gross
that's what this is
disobedience.
talking about anyway.
But it sounds like maybe through policy and press that
They'll
we will
probably
be seeing
coming soon.
some sort of change.
So do we want to pull off 7190 for separate vote, or do we not want to pull off 7190 for separate vote?
We can pull it off.
Yeah. Okay. And then the last item was policy 7340.
Yeah, and that one I called out in error. It was my mistake.
Oh, stupid. Okay. All right, so then at this point, is there a motion to approve item number 6 on the consent agenda, as well as policy 650, policy 715, policy 7180?
As long as the math is fixed on item 6.
As long as the math is fixed on item 6.
You have to say
Read
the
the
last.
policies again.
Policy 650, policy 715, policy 7180.
No, I
Are
don't
you
think we're
including the
voting on
recognition events?
715. I think that's coming back.
Oh, that's 715 is actually coming back to the committee.
Yeah.
So
Okay.
policy 650 and policy 7180.
And we have to vote on 7340. It was pulled off.
Oh, yeah, 7340.
But we never
Yeah, right,
voted on
Yes,
it.
very good. Right, gotcha. And policy 7340.
So moved.
Second.
Marcia, please call the roll.
Ms. Kleiber?
Aye.
Mr. Hunt?
Aye.
Ms. Murphy?
Aye.
Mr. Regan?
Aye.
Mr. Barsadi?
Aye.
Mr. Marhol?
Aye.
Mr. Miller?
Aye.
Motion carried.
Thanks, Margie. At this point, is there now a separate motion to approve policy 7190? This is on student behavior.
So moved.
Second.
Marjorie, please call the roll.
Mr. Hunt?
Aye.
Mr. Regan?
Aye.
Ms. Kleiber?
Aye.
Mr. Barsadi?
Nay.
Mr. Marhol? Ms. Murphy?
Aye.
Mr. Miller?
Aye.
Motion carried.
So then, policy 715 is going to go back to committee then. We'll hear more about that.
Just 7:15. right?
Just 7:15, right? All right, so then next item is Riverside Educational Council. Do we have any comments from the Riverside Educational Council? If there are none, we move on to board member comments. Does any board member have any comments about things they've done recently?
I have one question. Did we vote on item number 6 also for the recognition event?
Which one?
I wanted to make sure he listed
Item
that.
number 6?
Okay,
Yes, we did.
Great.
We did, yes.
I
So we're
thought so,
okay with
but
that,
I
we
was-
just need to revise.
I thought so, I was just triple checking.
No,
We had so many lists.
yeah.
Thank you.
So does any board member have any events they'd like to talk about they went to, or?
Oh, I think I wanted to announce something. I saw that Hauser PTO has a dining night at Labara. Did you say what date? I'm sorry.
March 6th.
It's a Tuesday, I think. But
Oh, that's what it was. I'm sorry.
Central District.
And that's maybe.
But Labara, what I read, agreed to give 20% of both food and bar
Yeah,
back to the PTO, which I think is really generous.
yeah.
So plan your nights out that day. Huh?
What day is that?
I think it's the 6th.
Trying to look at
I just read it last night.
I think it's March 6th.
Okay. Good to know.
Expect to see all you board members at Labara that night.
Who's there for the central one?
I guess from my own personal experience, I have a son on the basketball team, so I was able to go both to the Hauser games and to all the other games, and I just think the coaches, Mr. Burke and Mrs. Munson, did a fantastic job. Our kids, I was really impressed with the way they behaved on and off, so hats off to them. I thought they did a fantastic job, and I think the kids represented us really well, and as I'm sure they do in all the sports, but I got to witness this one.
I know a lot of us have 7th graders, but I know my daughter really enjoyed the Springfield trip, and I think it went pretty smooth, and I didn't hear any glitches, and I think she had a great time and learned a lot. I think that's really a special trip, and I hope we keep doing that one. And the other thing was, I didn't get to attend this one, my husband went, but there was a robotics competition that we hosted here, which is the first time we've ever done that, which is pretty cool because since they reconfigured the competition structure, it's been really neat to see some more local support rather than having to truck over to Oak Park every time. So, and they're learning a lot. It's been a great experience. So. And there's one on March 3rd. It is in Oak Park, but it's the Battle of the Bots. If you want to go on over, they go from 7 or 8 in the morning until 5 o'clock. It's a really long day. I thank you for the administration for setting that up, and they had PTO selling food, and it was a really well organized day.
Is it the 3rd or the 10th for the box?
It should be the 3rd.
Oh, then I can go.
Oh, great.
That's my grad school weekend.
Okay.
Till the 10th.
April would know better than I would, but yeah. But no, I know it was extra work for everyone setting it up, so thank you for
I
hosting.
attended two events. One was the District Science Fair, 5th and 6th grade, that is organized by Ms. Brownlow, Ms. Allen, and Ms. Esposito, and that was very interesting. There's some really good experiments. Always some really good experiments. They're really interesting things. You always learn things by going to these things, and so that was really good to see that. And I think they're going to the zoo on tomorrow, right? Yeah.
Oh, great.
And then the other event I attended either last week or the week before last was the middle school musical finalists and award winners. So they have award winners that are the best musicians in different categories for band, orchestra, and choir. And they had a special concert for them. Was it last week or the week before last? And that was very nice because these kids are extremely talented. Actually, the quality is very high. So I commend the students and the as well as the teachers, the Hauser music teachers. Just very, very well done.
It's the first time she's ever done that, also with those particular kids.
All right, so with that, we move on to, if there's no other, any other comments? Or?
One thing, I did run into a board member recently, what was it? I think very early, once 6 a.m. Before a early drop-off for the Springfield trip. Although I don't think we got, Rich and I did not get to participate in that event, at least I didn't. Definitely, I heard good reports back from the trip. Everybody seemed to have a lot of fun. I think one of the groups met the governor, or at least is what I saw in one of the social media pictures. So definitely a lot of thanks to the teachers and everyone who organized that. It was a lot of fun.
That's a long day, man.
That was the first time was this new group that was organizing, all right?
I believe so, yeah.
Good, very good. Any other comments? Then if not, we move on to the committee reports. First up is Policy Committee. Dan?
Nothing to report after an exhaustive report last time around, but I think we'll be meeting later on this week.
Good. Okay. Sherry, do you have anything to report from the Education Committee?
Yeah, there was a discussion on foreign language instructional minutes, which is really tricky and interesting, and so a lot of good things to think about. And then a new kind of assessment data that we talked about was fitnessgram data, where we talked about kind of their athletic stretch skills versus strength, and it was kind of some interesting data that we've never been able to see before. So and that was it for last month.
Thanks, Sherry. And then Finance, Rich, do you have anything to report in the Finance Committee?
Everybody got a nice care package.
Yes.
So be all lit fire and snuggle up and dove in. But Rob's going to start to go over in more detail here shortly.
All right, thanks, Rich. We now move on to old business. The first item in old business is the memorandum of understanding for 92 Repton Road, the demolition. So at this point, is there a motion for the Board of Education to approve the memorandum of understanding for 92 Repton Road, the demolition as presented?
If I may make a comment.
You can comment.
It's a motion.
Yeah, we'll usually
sorry,
read the
motion.
try to read the motion and then comment.
So moved.
Second.
So is there any comments or questions about
There
this?
are. I apologize for
No worries.
overstepping. The architect did reduce the compensation amount to $15,000, down from, I believe it was 25.
Well, it's still T&M
It's still T&M. That's true.
with a cap.
But it's a cap, and I'm still disappointed that it wasn't pulled down more. But I will, gleefully is the wrong word, but I will be attentive to see where the numbers, the final numbers come in. Because right now, this isn't much of a cap.
Right. Maybe we could ask our finance director to just keep an extra eye, I guess, on
Maybe we
how
can
the
get that
numbers
as,
work
as
out.
an information item in future board meetings when we have these kind of memorandums of understandings that with time and materials, with caps. If you could just let us, maybe as an information item in future board meetings, just tell us what the time and materials came to, and that way we can
Right.
kind of monitor that kind of thing. Does that seem reasonable to people?
Yeah.
I think it's reasonable, and I think any relationship like this with an outside contractor is a relationship that you assess throughout
Right,
the process.
right.
Yeah.
And if it doesn't meet our needs, then you reassess it at that point.
Right. So, Martha, is that something we can get on future, whenever
Should be
there's
able
a memorandum of understanding like this, we can actually get the final breakdown after we know the numbers as an information item in the board package?
Sure.
Okay, so any other comments on this? If not, Margie, please call the roll.
Ms. Kleiber?
Hi.
Mr. Barsadi?
Aye.
Ms. Murphy?
Aye.
Mr. Regan?
Aye.
Mr. Marhol?
Nay.
Mr. Hunt?
Aye.
Mr. Miller?
Aye.
Motion carried.
Thanks, Margie. Next item is student fees. This is incorrectly listed as an action item. Actually, I think it's still a discussion item. So, Martha, did you want to share some thoughts about, you've done some more work on the student fee question?
Sure. So if you recall, I think it was 2 months ago, we talked about athletic fees. We were talking about athletic transportation specifically, which led to kind of a broader conversation about fees. And just doing some additional research, which I've shared with you in that memo, it looks like our fees have not been updated for quite some time. And actually, board policy would be that fees really should be reviewed by the board annually. So bringing forward policy about our waiver fees, just because that explains what fees are spent on, primarily consumables and textbooks, can also go toward co-curriculars. Again, the idea is that these fees don't cover those full costs, but that they're an offset to those costs. So I do have a chart there. I wanted to open it up.
Page 139.
Thank you. So we have a recommended set of new fees from, and again, long historical view of fees since the 2005-2006 school year. Looks like middle school fees were changed in the 2010-2011 school year. But elementary school fees have not been changed since 06-07. And again, looking at comparable fees in the area and what would be a reasonable amount of school fees, there seems to be a good amount of variability district to district. Again, it is something kind of for the board to consider. I think it's reasonable to think that fees would go up to some degree with cost of living increases, and given that their fees haven't been changed in so long, the recommended increase is relatively small. Wouldn't reflect a true cost of living increase annually since they were last updated, but both kind of consideration for what our fees go toward, when they were last raised, and what seems reasonable in terms of charges to our families. I think this is something we want to look at and could move toward an action item at the next meeting.
So are you planning to come back with some recommendations on the fees then? Or?
There is a recommended column there.
You can't see them.
Yeah, I think that could have been, I finally found that. It was a little hidden, so in the future, could we have it like real, very distinct location? 'Cause
The far right-hand column is a
I'm gonna need more
recommended.
time to
Yeah,
look
That makes
at
sense now, because I was wondering.
Yeah, I didn't see
I
that.
saw
Sorry.
18, 19,
I
and
read
we didn't
this
know what
several
REC
times,
stands for.
I
Okay.
couldn't-
I saw it.
And you're amazing, you're amazing.
Just wanted to point that out.
Well, a bunch of us didn't, so I need more time to look at it.
Sure.
So these are extremely small raises then, basically.
Yeah.
See that to me, I think this is an administrative question, but I do think the fact that it was not raised in the past, it should not be a justification for not raising them now. We should figure out what the reason is we're levying these fees at all, and if it is to pay for what you call consumables, then we should just do that calculation and say here it is. The fact that they weren't raised, for the last 10 years or whatever, how many, that's irrelevant. People, it shouldn't be a factor.
I still disagree with you. I think for a family to go from 70 to go to, let's say it's 100 times 4 kids, I think it's a significant increase for a family. So I'm not sure it has to be this high of a jump. I'm all for increasing fees within reason, but I'd like to see some numbers. What are we paying for? It's a little bit random. Textbooks, consumables, what does that mean? We have a curriculum budget where we sometimes get free consumables, sometimes not. I want to see the numbers.
Right? Can we see those? Can we get those calculations?
I'm not averse to raising it a little bit so it makes some sense, but it can't be a jump that's going to shock the family. It's just not their fault that it didn't get raised.
Or they could look at the other way. That they've been benefiting from the fact that no one's been attending to the fees for the last decade or more.
Well, who's they? I mean, a brand new family wouldn't have benefited from that.
I guess I just have a question for you, Martha, is why are there some, it seems like so much everything's increasing, but there are some areas that are not increasing. I guess, what's the reasoning behind not increasing those fees versus?
You mean the middle school? Because they were redone.
Right, so the middle school did go through a fee increase, and I think to Sherry's point, it was to not kind of create a sticker shock for our families that, again, if you've been in the district for a long time, maybe there's an assumption that fees just don't change, or that I don't think they should stay stable, but I don't know that it's sort of fair to raise them up significantly in a 1 year's time. I think for us to have a process in an ongoing way,
I'm
so
fine to
that
prorate it with inflation or whatever you want to do, but I don't think
I guess-
catching up in 1 year is appropriate.
No, and I would agree with you.
Well, I think there was another part of this discussion we may still be waiting to hear back from in terms of, why are some things charged a fee, others are not. I understand you're saying they're consumables, but if there's any way to delve a little more into that or provide more information.
Yeah.
Just some quantifiable.
Well, Meryl did a good amount of research on consumables, textbooks, materials. It's a very hard number to capture.
I can catch, I can capture everything that's program-based. So in other words, the math workbooks, the ELA workbooks. What you sometimes can't capture are Blackline Masters and all those printing costs per teacher, things like that, that are also technically consumables, but not something we purchase. It's part of that
cost. We were pretty, from the fees that are being recommended, if you just wanted to flat out talk about consumables with not like the science supplies, that's something that is not steady year to year. It's about what experiments we're conducting and how many times the kids need to conduct an experiment. So we have some consumable supplies that we replace annually in areas like STEAM or science and other encore. So there's encore consumable fees that are also sort of embedded in there at like an average level. But if you had to go straight up just consumables, the fees that are represented there are pretty close to the straight up consumable fee with not accounting for anything else. That's not as quantifiable year to year, if that makes sense.
And it's really not just consumables. So if you go back to that waiver of student fees and you look at the first paragraph, because that's the best descriptor of what our fees are used toward, it's the use of textbooks, consumable materials, extracurricular activities, and other school student fees. So this idea of a textbook, what it costs this year, and it's something hopefully we're going to use for multiple years. I mean, certainly there's a way to calculate that cost, but it is a bit of an imperfect, it's not directly, this is exactly what first graders use, and therefore this is what we should charge second graders. So again, looking at also looking at what do other districts charge. I think the idea of once we agree to something, then thinking about a sort of a inflationary increase annually probably makes sense. But this is something certainly that the board gets to establish that schedule. So, I think for all of you to, share as you are, it really does matter because there seems to be a good amount of variation in how school districts do this.
In your data here, Red River Forest seems to be the outlier.
Yeah.
Given that was your last district, Martha, do you have any insight on that?
So I think there are a couple things. I think there's a lunch supervision fee, and I also think that there was some shifting back to the families the cost of one-to-one technology. Not full-on cost, but some kind of offset again of those fees. And Don, I'm recalling, and I'm trying to remember where I recall, I don't know if it was tech steering, I don't know, it was the original one-to-one implementation, but there seemed to be kind of a philosophical decision to not have families kind of incur those additional fees because of the additional or new technology.
That's correct. At least that was how it was explained to me by the school board. So the one-to-one program started before I arrived, but that at the time, since the district had chosen to do the one-to-one program kind of on its own, the feeling from some of the board members was that it's a cost that shouldn't be incurred by the parents because it wasn't necessarily something that they were asking for. So.
I wasn't here at the last meeting when we talked about this, so I'll just state what I think really quickly. I do agree that, fees should go up based on inflation. I'm certainly not a fan of raising fees significantly in any way. We live in a district where our property taxes are very high, so people are already paying a lot of money to send their kids to this school. I think you use the fees when you need something. I don't think there's just a formula where all these numbers are calculated. I think it's based on need. All of a sudden, it was free and public until we don't have the money to make it up. Well, let's charge everybody $25 to come in. So I think they're based more on need. And looking at our current financials, I don't think there is a need to increase the fees. So that is just my standpoint. I just wanted to share it from the previous meeting.
So I did find my baseline just for math, ELA. So my consumable cost just for math, ELA, handwriting, and this is K through 5, social studies and science, is $61 just for those 4 content areas, not including art,
music, some of the other consumable pieces that are a piece of those programs. And at the middle school, it's a little higher. It's closer to $62 just for those 4 areas. And that's just an isolation of whatever other encores, the art supplies, those science, some of those other pieces that are not actually workbook type of consumable items.
That
helps.
Like something that the school should pay for. I don't see why you expect you send your kid to public school and you're going to pay for every single workbook or textbook individually. It seems a little.
It's not textbooks. It's just those the consumables.
I know you got some of it.
An offset of fees. I understand.
I get it.
I appreciate that our district's fees are actually on the lower side of it. I actually appreciate that. I think it gives us as a district, room to move if we do come into some sort of financial crisis. This is an area that we could then, change. I personally am not, obviously it's just my opinion, not anybody else's, but I would be very uncomfortable with greatly increasing our fees.
What I don't understand though about the position that I understand you'd be taking is that you're okay with raising the current fees by inflation or something like that, roughly. But the current fees are not based on any rational sort of methodology or calculation or philosophy. They were set back in 2007. It looks like, I don't know, something like that, and then forgotten about. It wasn't like, it was just like the fact there was just like it's like a random number basically. It was like, and so like we're basically saying we should increase
The
the
reason
random
I
number.
said the inflation is because I said I would be comfortable if that's what the board wanted to do. I don't actually feel they need to be raised.
I think that's for the families. I
I'm
think
fine
that
with
would be
it.
something that families would understand and not be shocked by. I think it's not just for us to get our inflation numbers back. I think it has to do with the families that are impacted. That would be something reasonable that they could plan for. And not everybody has innumerable amounts of money to pay for a million little things. You know as well as I do, there's a t-shirt for this, there's a field trip for that, it adds up. And for some families, the inflationary number might be something that they could deal with. It's
No,
not
I understand
just
that. I'm just asking that there be some rhyme and reason behind the fees rather than just,
I hear what Jeff is saying there, and I'm in total agreement, because there doesn't seem to be much of a pattern or a rhyme or reason behind it. And if we're saying the current fees we're working with were set in 2007, they were probably based on previous fees, which were started on 10 years before that, which were based on fees from 10 years before that. Once upon a time, somebody said, let's charge $5 for this, or let's put $20 for this. Every now and again, it gets bumped up $5 or $10.
So possibly instead of just saying, well, let's raise it by a certain percentage, let's maybe relook at it and talk about what we think an appropriate fee is, like what the cost is and what percentage.
We have the ability to charge what we want, but it's hard to
Yes.
justify, really any of these things that we're charging, because we really can't say what we're paying for and what we're not.
I need specifics.
But I guess the thing to Linda's point, though, I think fees, if I recall correctly, from my parents didn't pay half the fees that we pay today. I think the fact is that people started doing it. It's like the check bags fees at the airlines. You go, one airline starts doing it, all the airlines are now doing it. One school district probably just found that they could charge for fees. We started to charge for fees. And so now we figured we're in this fee basis. So I don't think, to Jeff's point, I don't think there's any rhyme or reason to these fees. I think the fact is that we could do it, and it's based on history of we've done it, now we're charging fees for this. And so, but to Linda's point, I think it's also the fact that, it does help offset the cost. It does give us money to spend on other items. So I guess the question is, I think the broader question should be, what fees do we keep? Do we keep these fees as is? But I do agree with Jeff that if we're going to keep these fees, we need to tie them to something.
Sure. Yeah.
And I'd like to say, to Sherry's point, let's tie it to inflation, and just increase it by the rate of inflation. But I don't think just trying to figure out what these fees are for. I don't think we're going to find that out.
The rate of inflation is so low, though. It's really.
I don't. It doesn't have to be. It doesn't have to be that. It doesn't have to be that specifically. I just mean something that wouldn't shock the family.
And we also don't have to raise them. I mean, that is an option.
Well, what gets me though is I look at the information Martha prepared, or maybe Rob prepared this. Riverside is so far beneath the average of what everybody else is paying here. I mean, the average for K through 5 is somewhere between the 105 and 135 category, which is a good chunk beneath what our district is charging. So if we decide to bump it by CPI, we're still incredibly beneath the average.
This cost allocation is, the question is who's going to pay for it. If we're talking about consumables, if that is the sort of thing we're talking about.
Consumables, textbooks, materials,
That's what we're talking about. The question is who's paying for those? Is it the general, tax fund, taxpayer that's paying for those, or is it the family?
Users.
And that's basically what it comes down to.
That's right.
In terms of
I don't know. We have a decent tax contribution that they're paying from the property tax.
The experience at RB for these fees, though, it goes way up.
Right. And it hasn't
That's
always,
right.
Yeah. I mean, and do we know, I mean, we don't know the methodology of any of these other districts' fees, so just saying, you know,
We
like.
don't know what it covers. Could
Yeah.
it cover something totally
So, I
different?
mean, maybe in LaGrange, they get supplies with that.
I don't know.
price.
I
But
already-
the policy's somewhat standardized.
I
that
already
it's-
paid $30 for the supply box, and I paid to bring Kleenex and a whole bunch of other stuff, so it depends on what we're getting, you know?
You're right, but it is telling that we, as Rich was saying, it is telling that we are far below, the typical numbers for districts in our area. I mean, assuming
And
those
maybe
numbers
that's
are correct.
okay. I don't know.
I don't know if that's a bad thing, though, in my mind. I mean.
And I think those are the philosophical choices, really, that the school board has, is to sort of, I would think, be somewhat comparable, to not maybe shock families or to, shock families in a school district where they're already paying a heavy amount of property tax. What feels fair sort of in the short term, and then what would be the longer term goals is to continue to sort of, I think, keep an eye on it much more
I personally don't
regularly.
think you have to keep it like this, but I don't think it needs to be 30% higher. I think it has to be reasonable.
Can I make a suggestion here? It sounds like there's divergent opinions on the board here, and I think it may be good that we table this discussion until we get a number deeper into the
Yeah,
budget.
we need some more money,
Because
too.
that may change some minds here
Well,
as we get into the
That's a
budget.
good point, because we are talking about, like, what the numbers as we see now are 0.5% of the total budget, and if we were to raise them to what other districts are doing, they'd maybe be closer to, 1% of the budget or something, so it's not a totally negligible number, it's not negligible at all.
It's not.
The only issue, though, is kindergarten enrollment is soon, and people do pay fees then, correct? So I think we would have to.
Yeah.
Well, is there a consensus to at least raise fees by the very modest amount that the administration is recommending? Very modest? I mean, that seems
I'm
like
okay with that.
almost like a baby step, basically.
Can we just decide?
Towards your end. Towards your end, it sounds like right there.
I would say if we're
Seven of
going
us.
I guess if we're going to do that, I would say that junior high should also have their fees raised. I don't think that we should just single out the grades.
You don't have a junior higher yet.
Yeah, no, I don't. But I will. I have 2 coming up. So.
I knew that was.
I think the problem there, though, I think it's a lot easier, especially when we're talking about with kindergarten enrollment coming up. It's of saying it's a better way to say we're accepting the administration's recommendations than if we start cherry picking and start pushing other areas. Then it becomes a much bigger discussion.
Right, now I understand what you're saying, but I'm sort of looking at equitability. I mean, if we're doing it
Well,
for
this is $165. I mean,
I understand it's
that's
100%, but
that compared to less
So
than
maybe
80. I mean, that's significant.
I think Dan, I take your point, but I think Dan's raised a good point too, which we have a recommendation here. We can sit here and we can talk about it all night. Maybe we can come up with something better, maybe not.
Right.
Maybe we just vote on the recommendation, and then we could ask administration to come back and do more research and figure out more detailed calculations along the line that Ms. Brownlow was talking about, and revisit this. So that seem reasonable, people?
I'm fine with that.
fine with that.
All right, so then at this point, is there I was mistaken when I said this is not an action item. I didn't realize there had been a proposal. So at this point, is there a motion for the Board of Education to approve the proposed increase in student fees as presented?
Motion to approve the recommendation.
So moved. Second.
Were you moving? It confused you as it confused me.
Any further discussion? If not, then Marcia, please call the roll.
Mr. Regan? Mr. Regan?
Why do you call me first?
We're just going to follow whatever he gets.
You never have to go
Look at
first.
this Annually,
Mr. Hunt?
Aye.
Mr. Marhol?
Aye.
Ms. Kleiber?
Aye, and I'm also okay with looking at it annually, depending on what our needs are. I agree with Rich. Yeah.
Ms. Murphy?
Aye.
Mr. Barsadi?
I'm going to go nay, just because I want a sort of more broad review of this.
Mr. Miller?
Aye.
Motion carried.
All right,
I love
thanks,
how we're
thanks,
giving
Margie.
commentary on our. That's right. because.
Commentary comes before the vote. Okay, so moving on to item number 3 is the partial network switch replacement at Central and Ames School. Is there a motion for the Board of Education to approve the partial network switch replacement at Central and Ames School as presented?
So moved.
Second.
Is there any discussion about this item? If there is.
Has this been debated in the subcommittee? Yes. Do we still have 2 members of our board that are in the subcommittee?
The tech steering.
The tech steering?
Yes. No, we've talked about this, and actually I was the one that recommended trying to do, I know for fiscal year 18, we're looking to do Ames and Central, but I was hoping let's just try to get everything done next year if we can, especially I would just get the paint over with and take care of it. Now,
Is that possible all at once? Like, is that headache? Okay.
So.
Because I know we talked about the stagger.
Right, we talked about this item at the last policy committee, right? Is that right? Any further questions or comments about this? If not, then Marjorie, please call the roll.
Ms. Murphy?
Aye.
Mr. Bersadi?
Aye.
Mr. Hunt?
Aye.
Mr. Marhol?
Aye.
Ms. Kleiber?
Aye.
Mr. Regan?
Aye.
Mr. Miller?
Aye.
Motion carried.
Thanks, Margie. Next we move to the kindergarten enrollment and registration. Martha, did you want to update us on what you're thinking about that?
Right, so I've attached for all of you the policy related to 7:30 that talks about elementary school student assignment policy that speaks to maintaining the neighborhood school concept, effectively using classroom space across all 4 elementary schools, and providing the administration with an effective tool for maintaining the class size policy with a goal of 20 students in K-3 and 23 students in grades 4-5. And then it actually goes on to kind of explain a process around kindergarten student assignment. So we have our kindergarten information night, as you know, coming up on March 8th. I want to make sure I'm saying that right. I'm opening I'm opening it up as I speak.
So weird.
And
do it again.
And at our last meeting, we had also talked about enrollment at Blythe and Central, and was there something in terms of board consideration, more board discussion around potentially having 2 sections of school at Blythe? And I was reminded that last year at the kindergarten information night, we welcomed all our kindergarten families to District 96 and said that we would be carefully looking at their assignments at specific schools and making decisions from there. And I think the same would hold true for this year, that we do want to take a close look at students at their proximity to the different schools, at the family configurations, siblings in particular. I know some people have heard this. I already have heard some rumblings that people are very nervous that we're going to kind of, I think, pluck children out of schools and transfer them to a different school potentially. And I just want to go on record as saying that the group of students that we are going to consider in terms of the best enrollment scenario for them will be all of our new incoming kindergartners that do not already have siblings at one of the other elementary schools. If there are already siblings at the other elementary schools, they would go where their sibling is already attending. But we don't know. We don't know that we would have the right configuration of students, the right enrollment numbers, to potentially even open a second section of kindergarten at Blythe. So it really seems premature to sort of kind of come to consensus or even to vote on that, but it's something that I know I need to keep an eye on as we continue to balance our class size and student enrollment.
I have so maybe it's a weird question, but does anyone remember from the demographic trends about the birth trends in the next coming years? Like how it compares? You know how we have this giant 7th grade bubble and we have a...
Isn't it supposed to remain relatively
Is it
flat?
supposed to remain...
Flat. That's what I recall.
Back of the current document.
Oh, yeah. I was just curious because, you get these bubbles. And, I think that's the hardest part is knowing when you're going to have these.
And I don't know if
But that
we
doesn't
understand the
include
bubble
kids that
comes from
move
like
in.
that live birth ratio.
Or if it's kids that move in.
Right, I think that's what we're trying to understand, and that's the anecdotal informal. Are there more families? That's sort of what we've heard anecdotally, right? More families. The library programs and the preschool programs seem more crowded right now, but that's not so much scientifically based, so I don't, it's something parents share with me, I will say that.
But I think what you're saying makes total sense. Yeah, that's the way sort of you have to do it. You have to see where the students enrolling, where they live, how many are there, and then you have to decide, okay, now where are we going to put them based on all that.
Right.
I guess I would maybe like to take this opportunity just to suggest that the board take a look at this policy 730, because I think it's the enrollment policy, and I totally 100% support the intention of the policy, which is that we are a district that basically one of our great strengths is the neighborhood school. You know, so that's why it's very attractive to live here in many ways, because you can walk to the schools, you're not being bussed all over town. And the supporting the idea of a neighborhood school, I think, is, you know, that's I'm totally 100% behind that part of the policy. What I think the policy maybe could be improved is looking at how it's actually implemented. And the way it's implemented is through these attendance areas. So they talk about we're enrolling in the district and we have flexible boundaries, but then in the very next paragraph, and we have to have flexible boundaries because enrollment fluctuates from year to year. Then it starts getting into this business of attendance areas, where you actually there's a well-defined map, and it says if you're on this side of the street, you're over here, and you're on that side of the street. And that, to me, it strikes me as sort of a little bit contradictory, you know, with the first part of the policy, which is the flexible boundaries. So I guess what I'd like to maybe ask the board to look at is looking at this policy, which I know they spent a lot of time, like back in the 2000s, maybe even before that. This was like, and the people I've talked to who were involved in that say no one was ever 100% satisfied with the whole, you know, thing, because it is kind of a hybrid. And maybe what we could do is what I would suggest is get rid of the notion of attendance area and say you register in the district, but once you register, you'll be assigned to the school to which you're closest, assuming you don't have a sibling, in which case you're already your grandfather, given the constraints that we have about where we have space. So we have a certain number of openings at Blythe, certain number of openings at Central, whatever. We'll assign students based on their where they live in the school they're closest to by walking distance, and make the criteria an objective criteria rather than we're just going to throw darts. It's going to be objectively, okay, these students live closer to here, these students live closer to here, we've got these constraints, we've got this many spots here, this many spots here, and then just sort of totally eliminate the notion of attendance area, because I think the attendance area, if you look at the boundaries, you look at the old studies that were done back in the 2000s, they're constantly changing. It's like they draw it over here and then they redraw it. Yeah. You can never have a fixed boundary like that, because every time you fix it, the number of students will change, and then you have to move it again. So it's really not possible to have a fixed boundary and the flexible boundary at the same time. It's really. So that's what I'd like to maybe suggest that we think about a little bit.
I still like the idea of the algorithm that was supposed to have been used, and it doesn't seem like it's being used. So I still want to encourage administration to use
would be the
it.
objective criteria.
Right, because we talked about how it has to do with how many basically walking steps you are from whatever school, and tries to work on what's best for that family, assuming they could walk or whatever. That seems the
But I think
reasonable
the
thing.
algorithm has maybe been applied to the exceptions, as opposed to, I think what you're saying is the algorithm
No, I'm
should
saying
be
it
the
could be
primary.
broadened. It could be broadened. I don't know if that's the best way, but.
I would agree with Jeff. I think just having sort of fixed boundaries, given the changing demographics, I think would probably be good that we think about that and possibly getting rid of it.
Yeah, it makes sense to me. I think I think we need to make sure we have somebody who could always, perform that algorithm, and I think that's setting.
Jeff, you're going to be here every week.
So we made the policy kind of just say an objective criteria. We don't get into say this is the algorithm, but it's a well-defined mathematical sort of problem. It's a well-studied problem that mathematicians solved in the 1950s. So it's not something that I think we could figure that out.
Yeah, no, and I think you can lay out the policy clear enough that while there might not be actual attendance boundary lines, it is based on where you're closest. So it's not like if I enroll my kids, they're going to just send me to
Hollywood.
To Hollywood if I live
because that wouldn't
at the
make any
ballpark.
sense.
Yeah.
Right.
To make it very clear that the intention is the exact same, that you will be going to you will hopefully be going to the school that you're closest to, unless there are enrollment constraints which require shifting. So I mean, it really, in a sense, it's not really changing the policy.
It's not. It's changed, making it. It's a better implementation of policy. Is what I would say.
I think we need to maybe think about this not just in a month. I think this is something we need to think, really think
fleshed out.
But
definitely room for more and additional discussion, frequent discussion. I think that's there's a lot to decide on this.
Does it require more clarity in the language in the policy?
There's I think it does. I think the policy can be much simpler and shorter. There's a school district out in Belmont, Redmond, California, out in Silicon Valley. They've got 6 small elementary schools like ours, and they've got the same issue. They're neighborhood schools, and they had, but they have constraints on how many students can go to each school. And so they implemented a policy which is basically what I think we should look at, which is a flexible boundary policy, but done in a way that's sort of viable and objective, which is we have these constraints. We can take 30 students here, we can take 50 over here, but we're going to minimize, let's say, walking distances, the criteria. So and the policy is very simple, actually. Then there's like an administrative procedure which gets into a little more detail, like how it actually works. So I think that's something that I would think we could look at as well.
I think it's important to keep a wait list in case they get moved and somehow someone moves away and a spot opens up. I think a family should have the right to petition to wait on a list to get back into, if for some reason they get placed far away. I think it's reasonable to allow them a chance to try and get back to that if for some reason spots open up. That's just my opinion.
No, that makes sense.
Because I believe that's how it currently says. You can put your name on the list and you can.
So maybe we can revisit this topic in a future meeting and get in a little more detail. Are there any other comments or questions about the kindergarten enrollment and registration then at this point?
No, I think very comfortable with the direction you're taking. Instead of possibly going through and forcing 2 classes somewhere, let's figure out what it looks like. So I appreciate that.
Well, thanks for weighing in on the policy. I do think there's potentially some clarity that could come through a policy revision.
Next item is the Blythe Park roof update. I don't know if Mr. Holmes would like to give us some updates on that.
Well, if you look in the landmark paper, you will see an ad in the paper soliciting bids for the Blythe Park roof. The bids will be due March 7th, and in between then there will be a walkthrough of Blythe so that they can look and examine, make sure everything's okay, get the scope. And then that day we will open the bids publicly where the bidders can watch us open the bids, and then we will score the bids, and we may have some information for the board that evening regarding what we're looking at. During that day, or we will interview the prospective winning bidder, and we will vet them and make sure that they are truly the lowest bidder. And then the bidder will go out and start work on, the tentative date is June 11th, and finish by August 10th.
So the board still has to approve the contract?
Yes,
right?
Yes, we will, the administration will provide a recommendation and the board will approve it at the March 21st board meeting, if that works for the board.
Any other questions about the Blythe Park roof update? If not, thanks, Mr.
Okay.
We're getting nice and early, right? That's how
Yes.
February's decent.
Yeah, the earliest to get it in, because a lot of contractors already have jobs out there, so if you get out early, contractors don't have jobs at that particular time, you get more bidders and hopefully more competitive bid.
Great. Thanks very much. Next item is we pulled off 2 policies in our last committee of the whole meeting for further discussion. One was policy 415, identity protection. And I don't know if Martha or Dan, you'd like to review what the issue was and where we're at with that.
So that particular policy, it was recommended that school districts have their own legal counsel kind of weigh in on that one, and we just hadn't done that at the time of the initial discussion of trust policy update. So what you have in front of you now is a marked up copy from our attorney about proposed revisions to the policy.
question that I had regarding this policy is that it focuses on social security number. I mean, that's sort of an antiquated topic right now. It's like, it's just, I guess, why is it just social security number and not more encompassing?
About identity protection
Right.
in general.
Right, because identity is much more than a social security number these days.
I mean, what else would we collect from employees that would be relevant? That's my question.
What do you think, Don? You're looking like you're studying this problem.
All of the social security data. There's other data that can also
Yeah, this is very focused on Social Security.
Right. Well, because when you fill out your forms and you're getting your job, that's what, you always used to put. But what else are they putting is my question.
Yeah, that's what I'm wondering. What else?
Who's in charge of that?
I mean,
I'm trying to I mean, I think we gather, it's name, address, birth dates, we know income.
It'll be dependents if you're sure your dependents.
Right.
Their birthdays.
Okay.
Yeah, I mean, I'm just thinking this should be more encompassing than just social security numbers, especially if it was just talking social security protection, that's a different story, but we're talking identity protection, so.
Yeah, I know, they have it listed as that.
Right.
Direct deposit, we do have direct deposit
Would they, yeah.
All right.
Okay, that's important too.
So you'd like to have this go back to the committee for further work? Is that one, what do people think about that?
I'd agree, simply when you mention birthdays, that's usually a critical component
It
of
is, right.
your registration for so many things. So all these personal items combined do create an identity. So the fewer that get exposed, the better.
I'm fine with pulling it off.
Further review?
Yeah.
Is anyone opposed?
Yeah, the I-9, you have to also do your driver's license or passport in addition to your social security.
Right. I mean, and don't we do, I know other employers run credit checks. I mean,
You don't have to do that.
we don't have to do that. Okay.
Is anyone opposed to having this go back to committee?
Definitely not opposed to it. I'm in agreement that identity protection is much more than Social Security. I guess my concern or something for the board to consider on the other side of that ledger is that this is basically what press has given us. In that, the more that we're drawing outside those lines, the more that we're relying on our own legal,
Yes, that's true.
which is an expense as well.
That's true.
But I'm wondering, are there any policies that supplement this policy? You know what I mean?
That address what we're talking about, right?
Right. Like, we're looking at this policy in isolation. Are there other policies that also talk about these other things? I can't imagine it says identity protection, but I just want to make sure, one, we know what is the purpose of this policy exactly, and I don't know if that's something we would go back to the lawyer with, or even asking press, what exactly is the purpose of this policy? Because if we're creating a policy that maybe it's just not named properly, or maybe
Well, is there another human resources
I think that
employment?
Well, there's a whole section of personnel policy.
Well,
So
that's why
personnel's
have you
a deep
looked-
area around.
Right, that's why I'm
school board
wondering,
policy.
is anything
To
else
see if there's anything.
touched in any other policy? I mean, I don't know offhand either, but it's
That's a good
something to maybe look about.
Or
look
maybe,
into.
or maybe
This
to
could
Linda's,
just be the social security part, I have no idea.
right. Or to Linda's point, because it's maybe because it calls out social security number, and at one time that used to be what you never gave out. Could this just be a holdover for something old that we still just have?
Right.
So then it sounds like there's several reasons to put this back in committee, although Dan's point is well taken. We don't want to get too crazy with these kind of things because
Yes.
Right, because the
it's
more
a little hard to maintain everything.
It costs money.
But it sounds like there's enough concern on this particular one that we at least do some more investigation, if not change it. Does that sound fair? Everyone in agreement with that?
I agree with that.
Sure.
All right, then the next policy that we left off was 7260, exemption from physical education. I think there was some question about whether to include a couple of extra sentences about the meaning of interscholastic or extracurricular athletic program in the policy, and I think that that was the sort of crux of the matter. So
But then I think there was another conversation that really spoke to kind of the purpose of this one. So, and I was just reminding people that there always was an exemption to PE policy for medical or religious reasons. What I've learned, and we talked about this being somewhat coming from a Budget Reduction Act, but also that this was policy that was very much in place, I believe, for juniors and seniors in high school. And then the policy was kind of rolled down to start encompassing freshmen and sophomores in high school. And then for some reason, as sometimes happens, 7th and 8th graders were included in the policy. So I think it was really speaking to high school students that are very involved in interscholastic or extracurricular sports and activities that are often very time consuming and probably give them plenty of movement opportunities, et cetera.
Part of the school day or something like that.
I think it's just the time. I think it was the time demand. I mean, I shouldn't speak entirely for understanding all of the intentions behind the policy, but the conversation, the agreement, the policy is proposed as it is proposed by press, with the suggestion or recommendation that do we want to define the interscholastic extracurricular sports, and we're saying sure, that would add clarity, I believe, to define those. But then I think we kind of very much meandered into a conversation like, wow, would we exempt kids from PE, et cetera? And I know just in talking to April and to Meryl Bowe, to really even start to consider doing that is probably a very complex set of scenarios around personnel decisions and scheduling and enrollment and all of that. And I think the board had a very thoughtful conversation around the purpose and goals of physical education as part of public education in general. So, really my recommendation would be for us to sort of clarify, do we want to define that interscholastic and extracurricular activities, but then to kind of accept that the students in 7th and 8th grade may submit a written request to the building principal to be excused from PE because of an ongoing participation in these programs, and that the building principal would evaluate requests on a case-by-case basis. It doesn't tell.
How often does that happen? I mean,
So this is new. This is new to the policy that 7th and 8th graders are now included for even consideration. But I don't think we want to go out and say, maybe we'll just start exempting 7th and 8th graders from PE if they're in another sport or activity.
Well, our thoughts, maybe we need to consider, was this even a good idea to bring it down to the 7th and 8th grade classes?
But that's not our choice. Per school code and legislative changes, that's what the proposed policy is based on legislative legal changes. So it comes to us in that format with really the suggestion that the area sort of we get to weigh in, or the board gets to weigh in, is defining those terms more carefully.
I appreciate that it's been, pushed down to us, and it's something that we have to deal with. But I just want to put it out there that I think it's a terrible idea. I think that we all know kids, or probably even have kids, that participate in other sports to a very high degree, and it's extremely time consuming. But when we talk about opting them out of sports at the middle school, or out of phys ed at the middle school age, it sort of ignores the socialization aspect of it. And I think that's incredibly important. And I think that, if this certain kid is, he plays travel baseball, he's playing at this high intense level. Well, physical education is something different, and that kid may be forced to be put on a team with kids that don't have the physical ability that meets them. There's still a socialization aspect to that, and that I think is critically important. So again, I appreciate the fact that this is sort of being shoved down our way here, but I just wanted to put that out there, that I think generally this consideration is horrible.
I agree with Rich 100%. But from what I understand, what you're proposing, Martha, is that you're basically saying that it's going to be case by. If someone wants to get out of a gym, you look at the principal look at it case by case, but the default would be, unless there's a very, very good reason, no. Basically. Is that the idea? So that along the lines of what Rich is saying, you kind of have to go to gym, basically. Is that kind of what you're proposing?
Yes. Yeah. And I know Meryl and April had both had a chance to talk about that after the initial discussion about the policy also. Because then again, the admin procedures, which aren't even developed fully yet, speak to things like you would only exempt them during times of their actual sport, and even trying to carve that into what are our trimesters. I mean, it just becomes a whole road that we don't want to go down. But again, the policy's there. It speaks about May. It speaks about case by case. I mean, some of the unique examples are like an Olympian or something. I mean, would you make a rare case for somebody who's doing something in a very, like you said, time-consuming and
Janet Evans
significant
went to
way?
my high school. She was a swimmer. Yeah.
So,
Yeah.
given all of that, are people okay with the proposed policy as the administration sort of recommending it?
I am.
I am.
That's good.
That's fine. I get it. Where would you put them? And what would they do? So.
All right, so then I guess we can revisit this as a voting item at the next business meeting. No further discussion on this item? Okay, then if not, we move on to new business. First item of new business is the beginning of the 2018-19 budget preparation materials and budget guidelines. Mr. Holmes, I don't know if you'd like to kind of walk us through that, what you put together?
Well, I'm glad you guys were talking about household budgets during your discussion on school fees, because this is just kind of a teaser, there'll be a discussion about that. So the board has a 50-page packet that was delivered by a young man. And that's my story, and I'm sticking to it. There is a lot of historical information and information regarding the budget process in the packet, but I have a few areas I'd like to concentrate on. Before I do, I would like to note that the budget preparation materials are a tentative roadmap. It's a best guess as of February, and there is another 6 months for further information, clarification, and changes. As a school district, our primary role is to provide the best possible education for all the students. Therefore, I would like you to look at pages 14 and 15 of the packet, because this is the district hired Dr. Casarda to create an enrollment projection. Page 14 is the current and past student enrollments, and page 15 is the current and future enrollments. As you can see from that, the enrollments are predicted to remain relatively stable with a slight increase. The enrollments drive staffing, not vice versa. So the next page I would like you to look at is page 18, which is the history of the full-time equivalency of District 96 employees. As you can see, the last 3 years have approximately 20 more employees than the previous 3 years. Some of that is due to the EL program compliance and also adding sections due to class sizes at Ames and Central. Then if you go to page 26, you can see at the salaries and benefits portion are the biggest expenditure of the district. The salary and benefit rates are mostly driven by the collective bargaining agreements. Since this is the last year of the collective bargaining agreement with the REC, or Riverside Education Council, I used a 3% annual increase in salaries and benefits. I believe this is a conservative amount. All other expenses, I assume, would be a 2.1% or the CPI increase. So then the next question is, how does the district pay for this? You can also go to page 26, and you can see the biggest revenue source is property taxes. And since property taxes in the district boundaries are well built up, the biggest driver will be the CPI increase. And the CPI increase for 2017 tax levy year is 2.1, and the CPI for the 2018 tax levy will also be 2.1. So I conservatively estimated that the CPI going for the next 4 years would be 2.1 also. And then the next biggest source of revenue is general state aid, but since the evidence-based funding model says that the district is 135% above adequacy, general state aid will most likely remain flat. And then another big source would be corporate personal property replacement taxes, and that is driven by the economy, so I assume that will be also 2.1% increase, the CPI. And then the final piece would be federal funding, which is based on student needs, and that varies from year to year. So then the question would be, how can the district sustain if expenses are going higher than revenues? The first would be through attrition. At the end of this school year, 6 certified staff are set to retire and 3 non-certified staff are set to retire. The district hopefully can replace them with newer, less expensive employees. Another option would be to keep salaries in negotiations at CPI. And the final option would be to cut programs. The final category concerns the master facilities plan. The plan has approximately $15.2 million in construction costs, $41,000 in life safety, $8 million in operations and maintenance costs, and $4.6 million in other fees, for a total of $27.9. Major construction costs come out of the construction fund, and that is considered a non-operating fund, and there's currently about $2 million in that fund. So the question becomes, how do you pay for the rest of it? Here's the segue. I believe that thinking of the district budget is on the same lines as your personal household budget makes it easier to understand. Take your salary from your job as your income or revenue source. You have your monthly expenses, such that can consist of clothes, food, utilities, entertainment, school fees, and your mortgage or rent. Hopefully, your monthly income from your job is more than your monthly expenses, so that you can save some money each month and put it into a savings or investment account. After several years, you may have enough money saved to pay for major expenses, such as a new furnace or a washing machine. If you need a new car, you may pay from it from your savings or take out a loan. In the case of Riverside School District 96, you may choose to pay for capital expenditures from fund balances, go out for bonds and pay for them over 10 years or so with fund balances or operating funds, or a combination of both. In March, Tammy Beckwith from PMA will go over these options, plus explore any options that may be available. Now, there are 2 problems that have recently arisen. Governor Rauner in the past has proposed that a property tax freeze, and in its recent 2018 budget address proposed a teacher's retirement system cost shift of 25% per year until fully picked up by school districts. Both would cause financial hardships for the district. The property tax freeze would be devastating, as property taxes are approximately 87% of all district revenues. Therefore, the district would be unable to keep up with rising costs. The cost shift would also be very problematic, because the district would have to pick up an unfunded $320,000 the first year, $665,000 the next year, $1.038 million the following year, and $1.44 million the following year. The only real solution to the cost shift would be to allow school districts to levy for taxes. This solution would be a financial burden to the taxpayers of Riverside School District 96. So after painting such a wonderful scenario, do you have any other questions?
Rob, on page 7, you start detailing out what you consider to be problem areas, as we title them, for having an adverse effect on the budget. And you mentioned possible new legislation down in Springfield that's going to affect that. Can you just summarize a couple of the other areas that you think are going to have even more of a negative impact on the budget?
Well, like I said, the possible pension cost shift and the property tax freezes, and then any other unfunded mandates that they may come up with.
What about, let's see here. You summarize uncertainty regarding future state sources of revenue. Is that basically what you're centering on, is retirement and
the state of Illinois has like the worst bond credit rating, so it's going to be hard for the state to raise money also to help fund these various school districts and other public entities.
Can you explain your comments about LADSI?
Well, LADSI, that fee is based on students. So one time you could have an influx of new students coming to the district with special needs, so that could drive up costs, or maybe one year you don't. And also now LADSI is also revamping their cost structure to make it more of a based on services, not necessarily just passing the whole cost on and dividing out by districts. So it's more of like a cafeteria plan.
But you mentioned that the impact of the new formula could be cost neutral.
Yes, as it turned out, at least this next year, it looks like it will be cost neutral.
Okay.
But in future years, it could be a benefit to the district.
On the topic of LADSI, I noticed that the amount that we pay to LADSI fluctuates quite a lot. And I see that this year, I think you're forecasting something like 1.3 or 1.4 million. Is that correct? Is that roughly right?
Yes.
And then last year it was closer to 2 million. And the year before that it was again closer to 1.3 million. Does that sound right to you?
It sounds about right. It just fluctuates depending on.
It seems like a huge fluctuation, going from 1.3 to 2 and then back down. It's like they're huge fluctuations. Is it really driven by just a handful of students that move in, that cost changes of that magnitude?
It has to be, it's based on students.
Okay.
So depending on one year might have more students, or it could be a student with more needs than others.
So I think in your September, if I remember correctly, from your September budget, when you presented the budget for the current year, then you were forecasting LADSI cost closer to 2 million per year going forward. And now it's back to 1.4 million, I think, going forward. So it seems like that's a crucial sort of area where.
Right. Yeah, I need to dive further into that and examine and work with. I think we're having LADSI come in, and Brian will discuss how they charge and things
Right,
like
so
that.
certainly looking at their new cost structure, their proposed new cost structure, but then I think there are those unique student variations that are sort of very hard to anticipate.
I wonder though, in this LADSI section, would that include any kind of pass-through tuition for some students who are going out of district to other schools? Would that come through LADSI, or is that earmarked elsewhere?
They would earmark as other costs, so it would be lumped in with the LADSI.
If it was a LADSI, so kids may go out of the district because they attend a LADSI self-contained program. Children may also go out of the district for a private day school program, which is a state-approved non-LADSI program. Both are significant costs.
And sometimes transportation to get there.
Right, I'm wondering if that might have something to do with the
I'm
fluctuation.
sure it does. Yeah, depending on if a child graduates or who knows, or more move in, or I don't know.
I think to reconstruct, you'd almost have to go back in time with the special education director, look at the special education child
I was going to say,
counselors.
I think if you go back, there is some history as to why those fluctuations were that extreme in that time frame. I don't know the exact personnel or politics behind it, but I do remember that being a topic of conversation. So I don't know it though, so I'm not going to.
And unfortunately, this state reimbursement and federal reimbursement doesn't keep up with the costs of supporting these students.
No, not even close.
So the other big item that I noticed is supplies and materials. It's at 1.9 million for next year. It's 1.9, basically the same as this year. but that number of 1.9 million is quite a bit higher than the average of these supplies and materials over the preceding 5 years. What accounts for that big
What
growth?
page are you on?
I'm on page
26.
Oh, you're still on 26? Okay. Okay.
Glad you brought that up, Jeff, because, even 3 years ago, it was under $1 million. 4 years ago, it was under $1 million. So that's quite a significant jump.
Now, I know there's been some curriculum enhancements that the district has implemented.
But shouldn't that? I thought with the major purchases for that we've already made, like for ELA and for math, certain that was a kind of one-time purchases that were the bulk, like $300,000 for
Right.
English last year, and then
we
shouldn't that
reevaluate.
be rolling off for a little bit, or at least?
Some of it should be rolling off.
But it looks like okay.
I know you have that, so things that might roll off, and it's often like a roughly 5 to 7 year cycle for curriculum materials. So I'm just wondering if the projections are maybe just too high there. We have to go back and look.
Yeah, it might be a little too high.
When you say 5 to 7 years, does that mean like we purchased this curriculum from Pearson for English? Does that have a lifespan? Like after 5 years, we have to purchase it again, or do we have it indefinitely as long as we keep paying for the annual sort of fees? How does that work?
No, we purchase for a 5-year chunk, and then we revisit as long as we decide to keep it. That annual will go up by like whatever their normal cost increase is.
So just complete purchase.
So the big purchase of $300,000, we don't have to do that again. It's just the
Correct. It would just be like, so you know how that annual consumable is like $30,000,
Right.
whatever it is? As long as we stick with the same program.
got it.
Yeah.
Okay.
Like Kirby needed an update to the teacher manuals this year, but the cost to sub out for us was negligible to
Okay.
get the new edition. So sometimes we'll have an upgrade, like in an addition, we might have to pay a slight fee for that updated edition. But yeah, that big, huge major adoption for all core resources. No, not unless we changed our program out.
Unless the standards were changed.
Yeah, unless it's that curriculum review
Well,
cycle.
I mean, because
that
2013, it's less than $1 million, and all of a sudden in 2014, it's $1.6 million. It's significant increase just in 1 year. So what is that?
That might have been saying so.
I'm thinking it was the
$600,000?
implementation of the Common Core, but
Well,
But what materials would that be?
The year before I got here, that online platform was about $160,000 to year.
Yes, but this is $600,000 difference in
I
1
don't
year.
know.
That can't be,
You know, I
that
mean-
can't be Sync Solutions.
Yeah, no, that was it. I'm saying that might be a chunk of it. I don't know. I don't have the breakdown.
It's still another $500,000, like trying to figure out, because that's kind of where the major bump took, and then it's kind of taken on a life of its own after that.
But going forward, that line item, it should be evidence-based. I mean, why-
Of course, right, what is this paying for? Yeah.
Pardon me?
Yeah, what is it paying for?
That's my point.
Yeah.
And I think that supply budget line from the previous year wasn't spent as much as was budgeted. So that can go with some of the differences also. Whereas, I'd prefer all supplies and materials be ordered the first quarter of the year, so that way they're used by the students as opposed to waiting towards the end of the year to purchase them.
Except for science, because we do library.
Right, yes, exactly, yes, there's consumables that,
Yeah,
but, right. Right.
That's less than like $1,000. That's not a significant expense.
Because you don't want people just to spend money just to
That's
make
not-
sure that their budget next year
Right.
is going to be the same.
So notice you're sort of projecting a capital outlay of about $1 million a year going forward, which is not far off from what we know from the architect we have to sort of spend for depreciation and keep the buildings up and that sort of thing. I think they came back with a number that's close to that.
Right.
But it doesn't look like you're sort of budgeting anything for any kind of new construction. in
No,
this
that would be in the capital projects fund, and I was waiting until with the school board, their direction that you guys want to. I'm sure we'll have more clarification after Tammy speaks to the board in March.
Rob, could you on page 7, you write a point about the Illinois evidence-based funding model. Can you talk to the board about that?
Well, the evidence-based funding model was basically used to, I think IASBO and ISA, a bunch of organizations put together reasoning to help fund school districts that didn't have access to funding. So the evidence-based funding model provides 27 data points around there about how to provide the funding. Unfortunately, after this was done to provide funding to not have the Robin Hood effect where you would take money from the rich and give to the poor, you would just, rising tides raise all boats. But unfortunately, the legislature decided to punish school districts that
manage their money.
That manage their money and or raise money by allowing for the money to be taken away from them through possibly a referendum.
Rob or Martha, have we had issues with the actual calculation of this value?
I thought you had said that there was still discussion on all the items that were going into.
Yeah, there's been a lot of discussion. There's actually, they've provided school districts now with a tool to analyze locally. As Rob mentions here in the budget preparation materials, they look at this adequacy target. Our adequacy target is considered to be about 135%. We think that that's likely a solid and fair indication. It's been interesting to kind of start to look at how our school district aligns and doesn't align to an evidence-based funding model. I think it's very important. One of the things they talk about is first a choice, do you want to align or not align to that, and then how you would do it. And really the conversations that I've been part of is that it takes years and years, because in an area where we may have provided a lot of service, and now we're thinking about how we may do some things differently. It takes a lot of staff training, a lot of building kind of community and parental awareness of, again, how we might want to do things differently. Rob alludes to this idea of one way to cut the budget is to cut programs. And, I know in my, year plus here, almost 2 years now, that it's not easy to look around and say that this is something that's not supporting and helping students, that I don't see that we have programs that aren't necessary or aren't, needed. We will continue to look at kind of effectiveness and how some shifts and changes could happen.
I guess my question is, what do you mean by programs? It's a broad term.
Could be cutting PE, because I think you can do a waiver now. So that's an option, or other extracurricular programs.
Is there something along the lines, I think, of what Martha's alluding to, which is that not that cutting programs, but are there a way to run the current programs more efficiently than we currently do? I mean, we currently have this model, I think, where we provide more or less every program at every school, like the kite program. Do we need to provide the kite program at like, is that how many kids are in that program? Or could we say they come to Central or Ames?
Site-based right now. So
It's site-based right now,
yeah.
but is that the most efficient
No,
way
it's
to do
not.
it?
I mean, what I mean by site-based is we offer it for all 4 schools in one location. It's not site-based in the individual schools.
Well, I thought it was one at Blythe and one at Central and one at Ames. Is that right?
No.
Okay.
But
teachers come from those buildings. So there's one at Blythe that services Ames and Blythe, and there's one at Central that services Central and Hollywood. And then, so those are the PM programs that service all the AM kindergartens. And then there's one in the morning that services the 2 PM classes.
So we have 2 sites now. Ames, you're saying Ames and Blythe.
Because that's where the teachers are.
And really 3 sites to accommodate also the afternoon children that need morning programming.
Right.
So could it be a 1 or 2 site or 2-level program, an AM and a PM?
Sure.
Right, and I'm not saying, I'm just throwing that aside. I'm not saying we should do that. I have no idea what the numbers are or where the sites are. But I'm just saying, it doesn't necessarily follow that we have to cut programs. It could just be there's maybe better ways to sort of organize them to actually have some efficiencies.
Yeah. Cutting programs would be like a last resort. I mean, I've seen-
that's why I was a little,
Yeah.
I was wondering what you
just-
meant.
I'm just, as an option, there's combinations, or I've seen it where maybe for paper supplies, you instead of school fees for that, you have the students bring in a ream of paper. And then that ends up being the
Kleenex
paper that the children
Yeah, I
use
get it.
and the teacher. I mean, there's, the last resort things, but those are, just, and obviously more efficiency of buying, from finding, joining co-ops to reduce some fees for other supplies and materials. Can help.
Well, that's the kind of stuff we should be doing anyway.
Yes, we are, but I mean, that's, you're always trying to improve upon that.
Well, the other topic that you mentioned, I think, was the evidence-based funding model, and I sort of think that I'd be very interested to see. I know we don't align with it exactly.
Yeah, I was wondering, how
I'd
do
be
we
very
fit with
interested
that?
to see where do we not align? Where exactly do we spend more than they say we should, or maybe could? Where do we spend less? What is the by area? What is the difference between what they are saying and what we are actually doing? And not to say that we're doing anything wrong. We might maybe there's we could say we do this for good reasons and this is how it should be. But I think it'd be interesting to know, where the differences lie exactly.
Off the top of my head, I know they value full-day kindergarten.
Right, but there's so Meryl and I did attend a workshop to look at how we align to this model. They also talked a lot about evidence-based funding, so everything is, again, based on evidence, but they talk about prototypical school size. And right there, we know that we don't have prototypical school sizes. I think our middle school is, but really our, and Central and Ames are kind of close, but even they're a little small. I think it's 400 some.
400 elementary, K through 5, and then 600 middle.
Yeah. So again, that's an area where, again, we make a conscious choice to have two smaller schools to preserve that, neighborhood school concept. So that's one area. An area that I will, and I want to be careful how I say this, is that the idea of special education teacher assistants. We have many compared to the evidence-based funding model. But what the evidence-based funding model really speaks to is a very inclusive classroom where teachers are, in some ways, professionally developed differently. I mean, our teachers are very inclusive. I don't want that to be kind of misconstrued, but we have for years worked with paraprofessionals who then support and guide children to potentially be doing different lessons or different activities, or perhaps support them to be included in the same. This model really speaks to what I would call a beautifully differentiated, highly inclusive classroom model. And I think that's something that we're working toward.
Is that how they describe it?
Those are my words, but that.
I know. I'd really be curious to see it, and
Yeah.
really not saying you're not accurate.
Yeah.
I just would really be curious to see the language that they use and what their justifications are.
So I'm happy to, I think I've shared, but I'll share again. There's a lot to, so the state provides kind of a definition of what all those programs and services are, and then the state provided a research article on what they consider, again, a prototypical school size, how you provide sort of those flexible supports and services, often more to the classroom. So it's very, very interesting. It's certainly somewhat complex, but I do think it's something that we all should be
So would it make
very
sense
well
to
informed.
have a board agenda topic in a coming agenda to talk about what the model is,
Yeah.
how it's described,
And how we fit in.
and where our asset allocation differs from the model, either plus or negative. Makes
Sure.
sense.
Yeah, I mean, I think we're really
Yeah.
ready to do that.
I guess I have a significant concern in this prototypical school model, and then talking about the school sizes. Is some of this model trying to fit square pegs into round holes? And is that one of the items where we're supposedly coming up short? And this is for further discussion, but can you look at that formula and see where we simply don't fit the model that they're promoting as ideal?
I think it's a healthy process, and we may end up in the spot that you're describing, Joel, but at least it'll be a conscious decision at that point. We
Yeah.
understand what the state is saying, hey, this is the norm.
That's absolutely right. I mean, I think Joel's point's exactly right, and this also comes back to something Martha said, like, you know, they assume, I think Linda found this statistic some years ago, which is the number of nurses per student. I think the number that's recommended by the state is 750 students per nurse, which if we had one big school, we could certainly do that. We could get 2 nurses, we'd be done, right? But because we have all these little schools, that it's sort of a little bit harder we can't chop the nurse in half and say you're going to have half you here. So it's much harder but is it exactly those kind of issues, the round peg in a square hole, I think, is part of it at least. But
I think it's for further discussion. We don't have to figure it out now, but
And having added 20, staff members, I think, in the last few years, I think it's significant, and I think it's something we should take a look at. I'm not saying it's wrong, I just think it's something we definitely need to think about with these increasing. And if you look at the surplus decreasing, that's not a good position.
So with that, are there any further questions about this very preliminary version of the budget?
I'd like to only compliment Rob on noting the strengths and problem areas and giving good descriptions.
Yeah, I think overall it was good presentation and good level of detail in the budget. So good job.
All right, well, thank you.
And as soon as, there's anything from the state, let us know, obviously, if there's any changes. I mean, it's hard to get anything straight from there, but, yeah, thank you.
Thanks. Next topic is the IASB self-evaluation. I think Martha is proposing that we meet in the closed session at an upcoming meeting, maybe where we have a shorter agenda, to do a self-evaluation. This is something that the IASB offers boards, and we did that, I think, a couple of years ago, where we had a board agreement and a superintendent board agreement session with Barb Tony. I think she's now retired, but maybe we can find someone else. So do people want to do this self-evaluation?
As much as I'd enjoy criticizing each other or criticizing myself.
No, it's complimenting.
I do think we're meeting heavy.
Yeah.
Our schedule's really heavy. And I would suggest maybe this could wait.
What do other people think on that topic?
I mean, I haven't gone through one of these before, so I can't comment. But I guess to Rich's point, I do think we do have a lot of meetings. I mean, I'm not saying we shouldn't do this, but maybe not in May.
Even if it's attached to a meeting that's already scheduled?
Yeah, I was going to ask, are those meeting dates, if they're Wednesdays, are those?
So those are meeting dates, with that idea being that we are meeting heavy. It would mean we'd have to somehow commit to having a light enough agenda that we could also do this. And I know we also have a lot pending.
Joel, what are your thoughts on that?
Fitting it in with an already scheduled meeting seems to be ideal, but again, not having gone through it before, I don't know how long one of these takes.
Dan?
Again, I don't know much about the process. It definitely sounds intriguing, and definitely I could see some benefits from it. The 2 dates proffered at the moment are in a somewhat problematic time for me. Not that I can't attend, but it's hard to make firm commitments.
Okay.
I guess we're going around the... I agree we meet a lot, but I also think something like this is important to make sure that we're functioning in the proper way, fulfilling our role the way we're supposed to be. So I understand the importance of it. So I don't know, is this something that we could push into the summer? Or is this, I'm not sure we ever did an actual an evaluation, did we?
That was a board agreements, how we would operate as a board, and then a board superintendent. Right?
Yeah, so I think this might be framed a little differently, since I think that was
you
more...
also did the self-evaluation.
Oh, did we?
I'm not sure.
I don't remember doing the self-evaluation, or did we? Maybe we did.
I think it was on a Saturday.
It was. I think he's right. We did meet on a Saturday.
Sherry, what are your thoughts?
I think it was specific to this.
Could well be. You're right. Maybe you're right about that.
I
Yeah.
think for me, I think it's a valuable process, especially we talked about, I remember us making charts about what we thought our district purpose should be in the future, and I think that's a good place, especially when we're still a new board, and a good process, but I wouldn't mind it if it was pushed into June a little bit, or summer, because it's a busy time, but.
I guess my view is I would not expect miracles of just some person coming in and it's like, okay. I wouldn't expect that after the meeting we're going to be somehow like a totally different board. You know?
No, I don't think that's the goal.
We're all getting friendship bracelets.
So I think the marginal improvement, I'm not sure the marginal improvement justifies the marginal cost, so, but that's just my view. But at the same time, whatever you want to do. So it sounds like there's like not a huge amount of enthusiasm, it sounds like, but.
They just don't know the good details, that's all.
I do know the June dates that matched our cow and board meeting were dates that the IASB did not have available.
Oh, okay.
I mean, another idea is to wait until the fall.
Would that work for people's schedules better?
I kind of like it before school starts, though. Maybe late summer people probably hate that, but I like to kind of get everyone on the same page before we start making decisions. But that's just me, but I'm not going to force you to leave your vacations. So. Whatever.
I'm flexible,
Whatever.
Do we have a consensus to defer this?
How about early fall?
Defer this for future, either the fall or sound reasonable based on people's schedules?
Yeah.
Okay, so just defer it for now. Okay. Next item is the Infinite Vision software.
Actually, summer school's right before that.
Sorry, summer school. Summer school 2018. Martha, did you want to update us on that topic?
So this, and Meryl, feel free to chime in here. This is the overview of this proposed summer 2018 summer school program and schedule. This is actually very similar to summer school last year. And I think last year and the year before, both Kim Hefner and Meryl did a lot to kind of revise and look at what was really engaging the students, what were the schedules that really worked for families to be able to attend. So that's what you have in front of you.
Big change in the whole thing is that we're putting a week between the end of summer school and the beginning of the school year. Because we couldn't get teachers into classrooms in buildings where we were using the classroom. Makes sense? That's the only major. If you're going to call it major, that would be that one.
Great. Any further discussion about the questions about summer school?
How were the fees determined? Do those pretty much
So
cover
we have it,
costs?
it's a wash basically, except for the skill building classes, the ones that are for the at-risk students, those are at a discounted fee, but any enrichment class has to pay for itself or we won't run it, so you have to have a minimum enrollment of 6 students, so it can be a wash. But the skill building classes, we do have a budget for summer school that account for. And those are at a reduced fee.
Any further questions about the summer school or summer school fees?
I know many of the classes are really popular, like Transition to Hauser.
And we have some new ones this year.
Oh,
That
good.
are really fun too.
I think it's nice
We've
that they-
hired some new staff over the last couple of years and they're coming up with some really cool fun ideas. And we are going to run robotics again this summer.
Cool. I like that the teachers get, if they have a special talent, get a chance to share.
Yeah, definitely.
Any further questions? If not, we move on to the Infinite Vision software. This is the Proviso Township School Treasurer a software update. I asked to have this put on the agenda, and I know the administration has, I don't know if they have a few questions about this topic. I don't want the board to be kept up to date on this, but from what I gather, and Martha, you can maybe fill in the details, the Proviso Township School Treasurer is updating their software, and they're billing each school district by their pro rata share based on the enrollment for this update. And I guess the question I have is, what is our arrangement with Proviso Township School Treasurer? Did they just buy stuff like software and then they send us the bill? And
Here it
then,
says to acknowledge your receipt of the cost, but we have no justification for why they want the software.
I had a lot of questions about this
There's a lot of
myself.
questions
So
here.
I'd like to understand the details about that, of that contractual arrangement or legal arrangement or.
Well, currently, Proviso uses the Township Treasurer's Office, and all the districts in the Proviso Township have a software called DCR. And DCR has kind of gone out of business, but this man, Mike Stapleton, is continuing the software. So the business managers in Proviso Township talk to and through the Township Treasurer's Office of getting new software and they requested RFPs from Proviso and the business managers. They did an RFP for software, and it was 2 software vending companies came and did presentations. And the same thing when my former district, we were also using DCR, and it was determined that it's old, it's antiquated. It does the job, but it's pretty antiquated. So my former district, the recommendation was to go with Infinite Visions, and they are actually currently implementing the new Infinite Visions. Infinite Visions is pretty powerful. It will allow the districts to pull information very quickly for reports. I know there's a module that if you pay for it, you can actually do your CAFR, which is another audit, an additional audit with the information that Infinite Visions will also provide. Also, with Infinite Visions, when you do a requisition, you can do it all through the computer online. There's no paper needed. Someone can create a requisition, and then it can be approved through an approval process if I'm the final approval, I'll get an email saying, oh, this is up for approval. Will you approve it or not? If the requisition goes above the budget, I can release it or say no. So it is powerful. So every district will have this software on their computers.
They'll do payroll. Right.
Payroll through this also.
Yeah.
But I guess my question is not though whether the software is better than the current software, which I'm very easily persuaded that it is, but the question of how the fee arrangement works out. I mean, again, do they go out and buy some software and then send us the bill? Is that and what what is our arrangement with them, contractual arrangement, where we pay them when they buy something? Do we pay for their office furniture? Do we pay for everything they buy? Or how does that whole arrangement work there?
That arrangement I don't know, but in theory the arrangement should be set up by school code and how they bill the district.
It's a statutory relationship that is a required relationship, and I think that this is the challenge. And Don, I don't know, Don was part of a software review process back in the spring or summer with them. I don't know if you have other commentary to add.
I just attended some of the meetings when they were first talking about the whole RFP process. The system that they're on, DCR, runs on an AS400 iSeries frame. It's a green screen terminal type application that is first implemented in the 70s. It's really old school application, and I think they're just having trouble supporting it.
Right.
So in terms of my understanding of the arrangement with the school districts is that with the fees that we do pay, not only cover the cost to maintain the software, but then they also would have a staff there that they employ that also helps to manage and do really a lot of our payroll functions for the school district, and that's divided up amongst the schools. So when they were looking at to modernize that system so that it could be supported for years to come, they looked at really some of the big players currently in the school finance application arena, which was not a part of the actual evaluation process, but that again, just came back.
Right.
So I do have a question. I guess what is our share of this? Is this amount in here?
It is
Yes.
the last page. It's total of
Yeah.
$45,000, $47,000 over 3 years.
Right,
Or
well, I'm looking at
7%.
one-time fees of almost $700,000.
Yes.
And I guess that's what we're paying as a district. Is that what we're paying, or is that?
No, it's divided up by the percentage of the total use by our district, is that correct?
Right, there should be a number, about a number.
On the right column, it should say our.
Okay, yeah, that's where I was trying to
But
get.
it's fairly significant cost, I mean.
Okay.
The startup costs for Infinite Visions are expensive.
Yes.
The
I
other,
mean, 200,000 just in services
Right.
alone for
It's-
how many hours at work?
it's a lot of hours in training and getting it up and running because it's complicated to
All right,
convert over.
Given the cost, I feel a little better because I was trying to figure this out.
Yeah, where does this come from?
Right, and where is this coming from? The costs are, I do not think, I mean, I understand the sticker shock, these are high dollar amounts, but the almost 700,000 makes more sense for the whole thing.
Oh, yeah.
Yes.
Wait a second,
That would be a little
there's a
ridiculous.
problem here.
But I still agree with Dr. Miller, though. What else can they send us without us? We just write checks for
Well, I'd
things?
like to know the entire.
What's our agreement
What do
with
we pay for
Proviso?
there? What do we pay? Are we paying for their whole operation? If not plus, what the percentage? Are we paying pro rata for their staff, for their
Furniture and
rent?
who knows?
Are we paying for all of that? And if so, what are the fees for that? And if we're not paying for all of that, what's different about, if we're not paying for the office furniture, what's different about the software? Why is this suddenly an item that we are paying for as opposed to, and I'd like to just understand that whole arrangement in detail. What is the contract? What is the statute? Exactly, what are we on the hook for? Rather than just saying, here's a bill and that,
And I have a question in general about the Proviso Township Treasurer, and I know we're required to be part of it, but I know there are districts that aren't. Why are we part of it, and how could we not be? Could we manage our money better ourselves? It's a random philosophical question. Why are we part of this?
Somehow, Riverside is in the Proviso Township Treasurer's office, which
Right. And I know there's some stamp to this, as we have to be, right?
So
Yeah, and I did talk to our attorney about this, sort of knowing that there were some of these questions, and it is statutory. It is, probably the answer is complex around, why do we have to be, and could we ever not be?
Because there are a lot of districts that
and-
don't,
And school districts, I know right now Lyons Township is sort of deeply embroiled in some kind of dissection of their township arrangement, and not something that I'm prepared to comment on with any specificity. I think if those are really the questions, I would say it's really legal counsel that we would seek around, if that's sort of legitimate question. I know it's kind
I
of a
think it's a philosophical question,
yeah.
why some districts do it differently, and why are we part of it?
Well,
It could just be
I agree with Sherry.
they mismanaged money just not so long ago.
About Proviso Township. They lost $250,000.
I know they did, and we
of our
ended up
money,
having to lose that just because they made some
I don't know, we
mistakes.
were supposed to get some of that back. I have heard nothing about that.
Right.
I think it was mentioned in there, yeah.
You
Rob
did mention that, but
Some of-
he mentioned that he was really getting it, but we haven't got it yet, so.
Well, and they still were, there was no oversight. They made
This
so
was
many
a
mistakes.
money market fund. They lost the money. in the money
Exactly.
market fund. You just think how the investment process works. They take the money from us. They invested it in another fund, IMET, which charges us fees. I'm sure the Proviso's taking fees, and then IMET invested in yet another fund,
That's
which
right.
was doing the fraud. I'm sure they charge fees. So think about that versus taking the money and sticking it in a Vanguard money market fund where the fees are basically zero. And how is that good for us or any other
Right.
school district?
I don't like it. I feel like there's no oversight for us to keep track of these fees.
circa
Right.
2007, there was a Cicero Township Treasurer's office, and I believe it was Oak Park had some issues with something that was going on. So then they voted, the communities voted to disband through, I think, legislature to disband the Township Treasurer's office. So it
Right.
can be disbanded through
legislative act,
legislation
right.
and voting. So
Right.
that is a possibility.
Well, I think it might be something we can think about.
I can't help but this is deja vu. I remember being at a meeting. I might have been on the board yet. But I remember hearing David, the interim manager, talking along these lines and talking about the difficulty of, well, number one, the statutory relationship and the difficulty of extricating it, although not impossible,
Right.
but definitely something that's not easy.
Right.
And also, I remember him talking about specifically the software that they're using, contributing to some degree towards the fraud that happened, or at least not making it as evident, not as easy to spot.
But having that many layers, I think, just leads to too many problem opportunities that you can't really control from our end. And it seems like we could manage it better. It's just my opinion, but.
I support taking a deeper look into it, definitely. I mean, and that may be having Shelley just do a, one-page brief for the board on it.
I realize that's where we are right now, and we're
Well,
here.
I think that this is some questions that we have that did you pass them on to the township treasurer?
I did pass your questions on, and they said that they'll get back to me shortly.
Okay. Maybe start with that,
And you'll notice that even this agreement, it's an acknowledgement.
It's an acknowledgement. It doesn't say you have to. It
that's the
says,
question I have is,
thank you,
where
and
do we-
please sign here for your money.
Usually it's not person A buys the thing and then person B gets the bill. When person B gets have no choice.
We should have some say, or,
If I may, Rob, can you add to the comments that Jeff already had? They note some annual fees here. What annual fees are we already paying for the DCR software? Because I would expect that there would be an offset of some kind. And I think this just goes in with Rich's suggestion about the mandate for more investigation is what services are we getting?
DCR is much cheaper. It's pretty inexpensive, but it's one of those things where you get what you pay for. It doesn't.
I understand it's outdated, but, I think it's a general concept that it leaves a distasteful place for me.
So it sounds like we have a consensus to hear more about some of these questions about the not the software itself, but about billing arrangements for it.
Yeah, especially after that $250,000
Take it out of that. We'll say we get that. When we get paid, we'll pay you.
Ask them if they will acknowledge that.
Will they acknowledge their mistake and pay us the money they owe us? Yeah.
All right. So with that, then, are there any public comments now at this point? Then future meeting dates are March 7th, 2018, Committee of the Whole, 7 p.m. at Hollywood. March 21st, regular business meeting, 7 p.m. at Hauser Learning Center. April 4th, Committee of the Whole meeting, 7 p.m. at Ames. And April 18th, regular business meeting at Hauser Resource Center. Are there any further items or any further discussion? If not, the meeting adjourned.